It has been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in the dreadful story of Little Nightmares, that is 6 times truer. There is no dialogue, no words spoken or even written, I think. I could be wrong, but there are very few games that stick with you even after the credits roll. Now I think that because there's nobody in the game telling you anything, your mind naturally tries to fill in those blanks. You begin to invest into the world and its characters. You want to know, where are we? What's going on? Why? What happened to the world? How does everything connect? And when did this all happen? Who caused it? And above all, what are we going to do about it? However, even after finding so many little pieces of world-building context clues, you will still be left with very little answers. This was an intense horror game, and chat, you guys have been asking me to cover this game on my channel for a while now, and so I want to make this a little bit more fun. If you're of age, drink every time I say the word nightmare. But if you are not of age, drink water instead. It's better for you anyways. Also, disclaimer, drinking is bad. Got your drinks? Alright. I want to take you all with me to experience Little Nightmares, first of and true to its name. Remember, this is a story explained, not a lore video. There is a difference. We'll uncover answers and share theories, and big emphasis there, this whole video is pretty much my own personal takes and theories on my adventure. As always, despite really wanting to know, I intentionally did not view anybody else's videos so as to not influence my experience, but everything I say here is just a theory. However, I hope to leave you guys with the feeling that we've played this game together, because in the end, no matter what we pretend, the journey is more important than the end or the start. So come with me, and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. Welcome to
Little Nightmares.
Startled awake by a woman who sees us, our world is tilted and groaning. Water drips on metal and echoes through the cold, damp darkness. All we know is that our tiny yellow rain-coated hero is named 6. But why a number? Well, there will be stranger things for us to ponder. As she leaves the briefcase 4 times her size behind, she purges through the darkness, crawling through a vent and out onto a long stairway up to who knows where. Gargantuan chains hang heavy above, and the sheer vastness of the metal world we're in emphasizes how small we are. How children see the world in horrifyingly immense proportions to themselves. But seeing this man hanging out, 6 is gonna need that chair. I will say this though, it's interesting how the furniture that the rope is attached to is elongated and bending in an unnatural way, and the guy seems to be quite tall as well. There is a letter on the floor, but we can't pick it up, so I wonder if this guy will tie into... oh, poor choice of words there. I wonder if we're going to see a connection later on. As 6 strides along, she would soon come face to face with this ink-like creature. Curious to see what would happen, she gets close to the worm and it jumps on her, constricting her to death. But she doesn't die. She simply reawakens. Interesting. Interesting enough to move on ahead and try it again, because after getting wrapped up by all of these worms, I start to ask myself, what if the reason we don't die is because this is just all a dream, a little nightmare? No, that's a bad trope. The devs wouldn't do that. They wouldn't call this just the dream. They wouldn't say this entire thing is just a dream. It doesn't make any sense. However, hopping forward, 6 would open up a small vent in the wall and out would crawl a creature even smaller than she is. I wonder what that was, and where did it scurry off to? But also, what the hell is this? And who or what was in that cage that it was dragging? After avoiding the eye of Agamotto, which for some reason when it sees 6, it seems to burn darkness out of her, effectively ending her, we decide to be a kid for a minute in this bleak world. But While she was jumping on the bed, an achievement popped up saying that we would jump even higher if we knew what slept here. With that is a big nope, and we run along. Except the next area wasn't any better. We stumbled into a pitch-black room scattered with old beds and forgotten toys, and for a moment, I thought this place might have been an orphanage once, a place where children slept before it was swallowed by the nightmare. The air was heavy, silence sharp. That was until the door creaked open. The sound of slow, dragging footsteps bled into the darkness, and Six froze, hiding under the bed. Her heartbeat steadied for only a second before it began to hammer, faster and faster, echoing the terror in my own chest. The creature was making this croak-like noise, sniffing the air and breathing heavily. It was odd. But we scrambled into the next room. Only the noise of our escape betrayed us, and that thing heard us. Pressed against the wall, hidden in the corner, we had no choice but to hold our breath and hope the shadows would protect us. That's when it finally appeared beneath the faint shaft of light. The creature was tall and skeletal, wrapped in filthy bandages, or was it skin, that twisted around its head and neck. A battered fedora sat crooked on its skull, shadowing the hollow void where its face should have been. Its arms were disgustingly long, fingers spidery and almost alien, dragging across the wooden floor as if searching, head in the air, sniffing for a scent. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. Six would desperately search for a way out, and as she found a cage to climb, she could hear the monster's heavy footsteps and intense breathing. Every second it prowled was torture. And that's when I knew that in this place, monsters weren't hiding under the bed. They were the ones that owned the house. But for now, it seems to have left, meaning Six survives this time. Unfortunately, we don't get too far before she begins to double over. At first, it was just a slight stumble, but then her small frame folds inward, arms clutching her stomach as if a deep, brutal hunger was gnawing at her from the inside. A low, sickening gurgle echoing out from her belly, loud in the dead air, almost like another voice groaning for sustenance. Her heartbeat thunders in her ears, each pulse louder and faster, as if her body knows that if she doesn't eat, she's going to die here in this forsaken place. Oh, yet but still, there is no food, no scraps, nothing but cold iron and splintered wood. Starvation drags her towards the floor, and for a heartbeat it feels like death itself had taken hold. However, from beyond the iron bars, a shadow rises, concerned. A child-shaped silhouette leans into the dim light, silently tossing food through the bars. Six struggles towards it, every movement heavy, as if though she's swimming through tar. She reaches for the food, trembling fingers clutching it, and devours it in desperate bites. Survival. Death by starvation would be a nightmare. Warmth returns to her limbs, her heartbeat settles back down, and the pain in her stomach begins to fade as though death's grip has lost its hold. She wipes her mouth, turns to the shadow on the other side of the bars, and for a brief, flickering moment of childlike gratitude, she hops up and down, wordlessly thanking her silent savior as the hunger becomes just a memory, at least for now. As Six pushes deeper into this world that seems determined to crush her at every turn, she discovers a hidden room. A single button awaits there, tempting in its simplicity. She presses it, and with a grinding hum, a massive eye opens on the wall. An all-seeing eye, its unblinking gaze stretching out. One by one, the eye of Sauron blinks, revealing its gazes. Children, prisoners, curled on narrow beds with not even a blanket for warmth. Then the view shifts. Those strange white paper-like creatures, the gnomes huddled together in silence, waiting for nothing, existing without purpose. Another blink and we see him. It. A bloated figure slumped in a pantry, motionless, just standing there. But then the eyes blink again, showing us a stairwell, cloaked in crimson walls and lined with pictures. And then, the last image. A woman. She's humming softly, back turned, face obscured. She brushes her hair in front of a fractured mirror. Either the mirror broke because she's really ugly, or she smashed it because she didn't like what she saw. But what exactly did we just witness? Surveillance? Control? Secrets layered on top of secrets? What does it all mean? Well, one thing's for certain, we're about to get some answers. This is, of course, only if we don't succumb to death by hunger, because once again, Six's stomach begins to devour itself from the inside. The gnawing pain like rats in her stomach. She staggers forth through the cold metal halls until she opens into a dark room. Above, rats dangle from hooks, their lifeless bodies swaying in rhythm with the groan of the chains. The air reeks of iron and decay, and there in the center of the room sits a small cage. Inside it, a piece of raw meat, faintly glistening under the pale light. Her hunger is now unbearable. Each breath is shallow, each step trembling, approaching it. Her body no longer driven by thought, ignoring that this world is trying to kill her and that is literally a cage. She crawls inside, collapsing over the meat, sinking her fangs into it with animalistic desperation. For a fleeting moment, the hunger loosens its grip once more, but then the shadows shift above, and from the ceiling descends a familiar terror. The creature with long arms, vile hands reaching down, curling like fishhooks and closing the cage, trapping its prey. That screeching and scraping of the cage would forever pierce my mind. The boy who was in there, he didn't move or even try to get out, he just accepted his fate. Who is he, and where is that monster taking him? It didn't matter. Six, refusing to become a victim in this gray nightmare, chose to fight. From left to right, she throws her body against the metal cage, ignoring the pain in her shoulders. She bangs her frail, bony frame over and over again until it finally tips over, her knees smashing on the concrete. But the pain can wait, because she doesn't know how long she has before whatever that thing is returns. The hopeless and the weak are the ones who die. Only the strong survive. But, determined to move forward, she drags a cage holding another broken soul and uses it as a makeshift platform to reach the lever and open the way out. It's just, that thing is right there, messing around with body bags. I wonder if those are corpses. Too big for kids though. However, Six really needs to move on for the sake of the story, so narrowly escaping Daddy Longarms, she crouches through a vent but then enters a room filled with shoes. Side note, a few years ago, I swear this is relevant, I was visiting Poland and went to Auschwitz because I'm really into history. But man, it was such a weird, horrible feeling, and during the tour I went into this room that was divided by glass, and on the other side of said glass there was another room filled with shoes and clothes. Those were the personal belongings of the victims, and I don't know why, but Six being in this room right now with the shoes and the briefcases just reminded me of that. But what is also unnerving is that there is something trying to get to her as she wades her way through. Is it that long arms creature? Regardless, Six thinks that she's made it out. Is that thing wearing a mask? I wonder what nightmare hides behind that mask. Taking advantage of its blindness, Six picks up an old toy and tosses it across the room. The sound clatters through the dark, causing a ruckus, and instantly the janitor jerks towards it as he scurries to investigate. Now, this distraction buys Six just enough time to climb, pulling herself up and out of the room. But escaping here isn't meant to be easy. Shuffling ahead, she uses a minecart to cross hot steam, but that's when she notices that the cart was moving left and right on its own, which made me think, we're on a ship, and the waves are swaying us side to side. Pretty soon, the janitor would find Six and be on us like a starving predator finally catching the scent of prey. He relentlessly chases Six into a room, where the gate would close but still be barely held up by a small metal cage. The janitor's arms would flail wildly about, seeking Six out, until... Comment your best joke down below. Moving into a corridor where hooks carrying body bags drift slowly overhead, we would grab onto a hook ourselves and go for a ride. Incredible grip strength, but soon Six would need to eat her third meal. But why is she always this intensely hungry, and why so often? Her palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's probably vomit on her coat already, and I'm nervous as she begins to hear the hums and chants of children ringing in her ears. There would be no help from anybody this time. No shadowy figures slipping food through bars, no bait waiting in a cage, only a rat squealing in pain. But wait, that's insane. A rat? They want us to eat a rat? The thought itself feels poisonous, something almost forbidden, like crossing a line that should never be touched. Rats are vermin, disease, filth, and yet at this moment they are Six's food. Her hunger rips and tears through all hesitation. She grabs the panicking creature and devours it raw. It's revolting, almost criminal in its wrongness, illegal, like a taboo that should never have been an option, but how else was she going to survive? The word cannibalism may not be the right word, but it's what comes to mind. It feels close, almost like an echo of it, what she's doing right now, something primal and disgusting that turns the stomach even as it saves her life. The rat's life drained, and just like that, Six's pain fades. Her heartbeat steadies. But for how long? And what if, next time, a rat isn't enough? After surviving the janitor, Six finds herself out of the frying pan and into the oven, where the stench of rotten grease thickens the air. Rushing into the kitchen, not really thinking, we meet the chef. Massive, deformed, stained aprons, and I'm certain he's wearing a mask, but what is underneath? And his attention span is short, because he saw me, chased me, watched me hide, and then started looking in a different corner, ultimately forgetting about me entirely and leaving. The whole section of this game is cat and mouse. Six slips under tables, hides above, crawls through vents, while the chef stomps around, always just a step behind. But the chef isn't alone, because soon Six would discover that there are actually two of them. Twin chefs, each with the same bloated body and disfigured mask face. They chop, grind, and boil with relentless fury, constantly hunting Six while never stopping their grotesque feast preparation. Which begs me to wonder, who are they prepping for? And how many people, if that's what we want to call them? What are they anyways? Why haven't we seen a single relatively normal human in this nightmare? Except for the tall hangman, I guess he kind of looked normal. But moving on, Six sneaks through the meat freezer, hiding in a crate, rides an elevator between floors and navigates through vents, all while evading the twins, but eventually it leads to a cinematic pursuit. Leaving the Chaos Kitchen, Six runs across a giant's pipe. The sounds of chains clanking, birds cawing, and is that daylight? Are we about to leave this nightmare? Oh my god. I knew it. We're on a ship. The ocean, the golden sun, the smell of sea salt. Wait, what is that? Another ship has drawn alongside us, but what are those hulking silhouettes crossing that gangway? Is this a cruise? They seem like they'd be into cruising. From a distance, they almost look human. Their shapes blurred against the horizon, but climbing up, the cameraman pans out and I realize that this is a weird-looking ship that Six is on, and it is vastly bigger than the ship those people arrived on. Should we even call this vessel a ship? Climbing the conveniently placed ladder and heading back in, we are now above the ship, no longer confined to the nasty lower decks, but we're about to find out that it's not exactly better up here. As the gluttonous adults waddle and file in, Six platforms upwards. But then she sees the lady, her silhouette standing above, imperious, watching everyone come into her domain. Slipping through these shoji doors, it is here that I began to notice the Japanese-inspired architecture. But then there were I don't know if we even call them adults, to be honest. I think it's just because Six is a child and every monster we face seems to naturally look older and bigger. But she begins to see these abominations feasting and consuming. They eat and eat and they don't stop, their hunger seemingly insatiable. But now at least I know, and it makes sense, who the chefs were cooking for. Actually, my wife, I love my wife, was watching me play this part, and she said that this game reminded her of Spirited Away, and for some reason that clicked with me. I really feel like there was some Spirited Away inspiration here, which I did appreciate. But coming to a dead end, Six would spot something rather peculiar. You need to zoom in on it a bit, but there's a drawing of somebody on one of the crates. It's shadowy and might even resemble a kid in a hood, and it makes me wonder if there's anything to that. But climbing onto the table and rushing past the gluttons who all rasp at Six, trying to grab her, their boorish hunger knowing no bounds, she would soon start getting chased by the very same ravenous beasts. These swollen masses of flesh, bodies barely able to hold their own weight, yet somehow, the moment Six darts across, they lunge forward with an agility that should not even be possible. They grunt and groan and wheeze like starving brain-dead zombies, and they become this wave of consumption, crashing and thrashing towards Six. They stumble and bumble over each other in blind gluttony, like pigs scrambling for scraps in a trough. But refusing to be a guest meal, Six weaves through them all and jumps across to safety, where one guest would even fall to their death. It's infinite hunger, sending it into an infinite void. I guess gluttony really is a deadly sin. But, real quickly, circling back to that chase scene, did you guys catch the painting in the background? It's a woman in a red kimono, her hand resting over the figure of a child. It's hard to shake the feeling that this is the very same lady who's been haunting us since the beginning. I think she's in charge of everything happening here. However, there's also the way that her hand hovers over the girl. It doesn't look protective, it looks possessive, controlling, ominous. And the girl looks dreadfully depressed too, almost like a warning that whatever is going on here, it all flows back to the lady. However, all that parkour has depleted all of Six's energy, so she's hungry again. Just like those guests, her stomach has turned into a bottomless pit once more, only filled with pain. What a nightmare. I imagine that she would do anything to silence it. But then something happens that changes everything. Harmless little gnome had stepped forward with a sausage offering in hand, a small act of kindness in a place where kindness should not exist. And yet Six didn't take the nourishment. She didn't even hesitate, she just shoved it aside, ignoring the food, and tore into the poor gnome instead. This was sickening. Worse than the rat, because this wasn't a vermin, this was something innocent, something that trusted and wanted to help her. It was conscious, friendly. That line that I talked about earlier, Six crossed it. It makes you wonder if hunger is even the right word anymore for her. Because if she can turn away from food and choose to consume life itself instead, then maybe what she's feeding isn't her body, but something far darker growing inside of her. Entering into a quieter part of the ship, the air feels colder here. The red walls cleaner, more intense and alarming, like we've stepped into the lady's private domain. This is what we saw through the eye a while ago. Gone are the iron prisons, the messy kitchens, and the grotesque dining halls. Instead, the corridors are lined with decor that feels elegant and refined, but suffocating, as if we're getting closer to the center of the nightmare. You can hear the lady humming. Going in to check on her to see if she's okay. Apparently, she doesn't much care for company. She uses her telekinesis to put Six back to sleep. After being chased through the dark by her, we would soon find a mirror that wasn't broken. And this is good because now that the lady knows we're here, she isn't going to let us leave. Bro, imagine dying to your own reflection. Six would regain consciousness, but it was the pain in her stomach once more that forced her up to look for food. But there was nothing for her to devour. Well, actually, there was. She was weak and lying on the floor, head hung low. Six's fifth meal. So now I'm wondering, what is Six? Could be devouring other beings, but more sinisterly their essences. Is she even human? The consumption of the lady would awaken something within her. She didn't seem like a child anymore. She appeared to be more like a little nightmare. No longer needing to even touch something to feed off of it, she only needed to be near them to drain their souls, to feast off the gluttons. But was Eleven born with these powers, or did she need to eat enough in order to unlock these devastating abilities? Six survived, thrived, and annihilated everybody in her path. But as the eye opens up and the light shines in, as she walks up the steps, I begin to wonder, was Six always an innocent child, forced to become a malevolent force, or was there always darkness within her? And even though Six escaped outside, she would still not be free, because now she would be stranded out at sea, still stuck on the Maw. Which I only now learned was the name of this vessel because the Steam trading card I got playing the game showed me the name, the Maw. And back down in the depths of the Maw, another child, a boy, would be waiting in the dark waters until something would reach up from below, and this place looks familiar. The kids' room that Six had to sneak through to avoid the janitor. We were back, but this time we weren't with Six. Instead, we were with this boy. Hearing the sounds of fleeting light footsteps, the boy would venture out where the booming pounds of the janitor's feet resounded through the air. He was still alive, arms intact, and chasing another poor soul. Something would drive the boy to not turn around and go back to bed. Instead, he would set out. To what end, who knows? But soon he would find himself descending deeper and deeper down, likely to the deepest depths, as now the floors he walked upon were flooded with water. I wonder what secrets the Maw has down here. Soon the boy would need to be swimming in that water. However, he wasn't alone down there, because something was snarling around him, chasing him whenever he would get in the water, and after so many platforms and puzzles, he would finally catch a glimpse of it. Rising up and out of its waterlogged chair, ready to send this nameless boy to his watery grave. I wonder what his name is, by the way. I mean, at least Six was called Six. Still don't know why she was called Six, but this boy has no name. I just keep calling him boy like I'm Kratos. Doing his absolute best to avoid capture, he would find himself being chased up a platform with a TV on it. Now, the TV had these weird triangular symbols on them, but the boy didn't pay them any mind, as he had an idea. With that water hag electrified, the boy is free from that nightmare. But climbing this ladder, when he pops up, hands would pop out from the darkness and ensnare him. All that effort for nothing, just to be locked in a cage. Except, this is where 6 is. We have been playing the kid that 6 watched get dragged away. But did the boy actually tuck his head into his knees and give up? He might have. The janitor did wrap him up in a body bag and sent him on a hook to where the chefs are. Actually, I just realized what the chefs were cooking, what the guests have been eating, which is why they also wanted to eat 6. The chefs have been feeding kids to everybody. I mean, I'm sure they're feeding other things, but I'm pretty sure kids are on the menu too. But where are these kids coming from? Is this what the lady has been doing, catching these kids to feed to those pigs? Well, the boy had a stroke of luck and managed to get out. Part of me thinks that 6, while she was sneaking around, distracted and caused the janitor to mess up and not properly close the bag, giving the boy enough of a chance to get out of there and get down here. Chasing the gnomes, one would get stuck in the door, so helping it and giving it a hug, we gain its trust. Working together, we would find even more gnomes, give them hugs, and enter a room with a giant furnace. Immediately, the gnomes get to work like those sprites from Spirited Away and get the furnace going, but there's just one problem. Output is low. We need more gnomes to get the inferno blazing even hotter. So we started checking the area to look for more workers. We do more puzzles and platforms, evade the janitor who won't be around much longer, find one gnome who's drawing, revealing that these gnomes are the ones making and leaving these drawings all around the maw, but then we even find that all-seeing eye, where we would see 6 making her way across the sea of shoes. With all the gnomes gathered and working in tandem, the boy's able to hitch a ride up and find the gnomes' hideaway. They've been nestled here together in front of a furnace, where the firelight would gleam on them casting shadows, but if you look closely, the shadows are actually the shape of children. And I guess this is pretty obvious, but it gets me thinking, what if the gnomes are actually children who were turned into gnomes? But then does that still fit in with the theory that the guests are eating kids? Do some kids become food while others become gnomes? Why gnomes? And what is their purpose? Does the lady know that these gnomes are living here, all throughout the maw? Speaking of the lady... So, waking up in the elevator shaft, not sure if the lady knocked us out. I mean, she definitely knew we were there, but the boy just carries on. If we weren't sure then, we sure as hell are now. We gotta find a way out of this place. Crawling through a hole and landing on a pile of books, it seems like we've made our way into the residence of the lady. And on the walls were pictures of what I believe to be younger versions of her, which I think is telling. It's like having your own face as your wallpaper on your cell phone. Plus, if you remember, she spends a lot of time looking in the mirrors. Yeah, she didn't like that I said that. So, sneaking past her, looking up some answers to some puzzles, coming into a dark room that has walls with pictures of some creepy faces. I mean, again, it's weird because even in these pictures, they kind of look human, but like terrible imitations of what a human looks like. It's unnerving, it's unhinged. It's like if aliens came to Earth and were like, yeah, let's try to figure out what these humans look like, and so they like looked up a textbook or something, or like saw pictures, and then they tried to replicate that. Like they tried to make bodysuits and masks to pretend to be humans. Human mimicry for funsies. That's just what I'm thinking about right now. A nightmare, by the way. Take another drink. But moving on, the boy opens a door and steps into a dark corridor lined with strange portraits. And when you look closer, they're not faces at all. They're just warped images of flesh and eyes staring from walls. That is weird. That is some weird art to be hanging up. Using his flashlight on his Alan Wake shit, he pushes forward, burning through shadowy children that lunge at him from the dark. But then he finds her again, the lady. She was staring at herself in the mirror, but something was off. She wasn't wearing a mask this time, and so we could see what she looked like. She had this inhuman, disfigured face, but the way she was, well, has been, looking at and almost caressing her own face tells me that she misses what she used to look like. This time there would be no mirror, so all the kid can do is run away. Upon waking up, the boy is no longer a boy. He's a gnome. These little creatures we've been seeing all along, it confirms what I feared. The lady has been turning children into these small, helpless creatures. But the question is, why? Why not just kill them or feed them to her guests? Why force them to live this way? Maybe it's about control or cruelty. Maybe it's both and she wants to leave them wandering these halls forever. That would be a punishment that ensures nobody ever escapes her domain, not even in spirit. Because, I don't know what the time frame is, but just imagine if these gnomes were immortal. They really would be trapped here forever. Waddling on with his little feet, nowhere else to go and nothing to do anymore, he simply finds a room with other gnomes and a sausage. Pacing around, his dim fate was sealed. There would be no happy ending for him, just like there would be no happy ending for a lot of children. He tried so hard and got so far, but in the end it didn't even matter. And, unfortunately, we know what comes next. But, somewhere else, there would be a TV that turned on to static and white noise. Nothing until something, someone. A tall, dark, slender man. So if you thought this nightmare was over, you're wrong. We still have more dreadful nightmares to experience. As the TV closes behind us, this boy with a paper bag over his head would rise. His name is Mono. Mono? Mono. Making Mono, right? Yeah, Mono. Well, cause like, in Avatar The Last Airbender, there's Momo. There's also another Momo in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and there's also a Noko. They're all kind of spelled the same, so that's why I think it could be Mono. But I think, let's go with Mono. Mono feels right, like monotone. Let's just go with Mono. His name is Mono. Making his way through this trap-infested forest, passing by a bag of bodies who got caught, almost getting smashed by a log, and maneuvering through bear traps, he would eventually find a cabin in the woods. House? Yeah, house. Cabin in the Woods sounds better because of the movie, but this is a house, one that Mono begins to sneak through. However, he knows that somebody else is in here because he can hear music, so he tries to find out where it's coming from. That is when he finds a kid locked in a basement. She's playing with a music box and seems to be sad, only comforted by the peace her music brings. That is until she's startled by the axe Mono is using to chop through the door. This is 6, by the way. I only know 6 and Mono's name because of the Steam page description for this game. Honestly, during my playthrough, I didn't know who they were, and I didn't even know this was 6 until a later point in the game, which is going to be obvious when we get there, but I just noticed in the back wall it looks like 6 drew somebody there and was even counting something. Does anybody know what that is? I never find out, so if you know, let me know. Now, despite Mono's slow approach in trying to befriend her, perhaps understandably, she attempts to make a break for it. I don't think that she was running from him. I believe she was locked down there and saw this as an opportunity to escape, but Mono follows her anyway. However, they would run into the dining room, which feels like something straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So immediately, I'm concerned about who or what placed them here, like this, and why. Maybe a family member. And also, I just realized that the kid at the table looks relatively normal-sized compared to Mono or Six, but maybe I just don't understand the full story yet. Realizing that she can't make it out alone, she calls Mono over to help her pull a lever, and together they open up the attic. But the slam alerts somebody in the house. Hearing them scream, stomp, and rummage around as they look for us was unsettling, but we needed a key to get out. A key that's up here on a hook next to bodies in a bag, except for a woman hanging in the shadows not in a bag on the right. What the hell has been going on here? Whatever residence is here is evil. After grabbing the key, the duo rush outside, but that's when they find out who the house belongs to. A hunter. And right now he's skinning something. I'd like to think it's an animal, but based on what we saw back there just now, it might be something else. Tiptoeing across, the two try their best to keep quiet, except they would end up making noise anyway. Mono and his new ally would need to weave their way through the forest while trying to avoid getting shot. The kids silently slither through tall grass, avoid his view, crawl through tunnels, work together to cross chasms, even nearly died drowning trying to get across a swamp. It's crazy, straight up evil to be hunting kids. But luckily, they pull it with a reverse part. With the tension finally gone, the duo steps out to the edge of land, on sand, and finds themselves before the sea. The fog rolls thick across the horizon, swallowing the sky and the water into the same endless gray. Gentle waves brush against the shore, each one quiet like a sigh from the world itself. For the first time, there's no danger, no pursuit, just the vast, empty ocean stretching out in every direction. It's peaceful, but also empty. After everything they've endured, this moment of calm feels like the edge of a nightmare you're not sure you're going to wake up from. But on that shore, a door, which the two would use as a raft like Leonardo da Vinci and the Titanic, to cross. But after a while being on the waters, they would begin to see debris floating, and even a TV which seemed out of place. However, the thought of how bizarre that was sunk, as the echoes of limbo stand before them. Emerging into view was this pale city, looming over them. A Carcosa mayhaps. The buildings were all bending in unnatural ways, and from out here it looked like the skeleton of civilization. However, leaving the ocean behind and striding through the blue-tinged air, we would enter a decimated apartment. Hanging above on a broken TV were clothes, as if somebody was wearing it, and then suddenly vanished. Pressing through this desolate, ruined city, I remembered my question from earlier. What happened to this world? It wasn't just on the Maw, then, that death and decay lived. Entropy has seeped into everything, as if time itself gave up trying to hold the world together. Buildings stand like fossils of civilization that forgot how to dream, their shapes barely recognizable, and the weight of silence has its own gravity. This extinction-level event reminded me of Kronos: The New Dawn. Link to that video down below. And TVs. Why are TVs littered all throughout, and what is going on with this TV? Mono approaches the screen. The warbling and screeching sounds tear through the air. The frequencies begin to break him down, shadows peeling away as his body starts to disintegrate. Maybe this has to do with that post-credit scene that we saw of the TV with the tall Slenderman. However, for some reason, Mono resonates with whatever vibes this TV is sending out, and so he starts to tune into it until he really gets into it. Six pulled him out of the TV. But how did Mono even do that? Do all of these kids have powers? Thankful for the assist, he grabs her by the hand and they head further into the city to try to get some answers. But then we approach a school and this achievement pops up titled 26, saying that she hurt us. What does the 20 and 6 mean? Does anybody know? But more impending, who is she? Inside, we find a portrait of a lady with her eyes bore out. Throwing something at it reveals a torture room. Bouncing up and down together, they drop down and scurry through the school vents to come out into this dark hall. But then, they hear some bone-chilling screeching. That is a lot of neck. Moving on, I notice a wooden board oddly out of place, and I have played enough Dark Souls and Elden Ring to know that that is usually not a good sign. Unfortunately for 6, she gets captured and who knows what they're going to do with her. They dragged her off to the left, but Mono chooses to go right. Picking up a actually it's just a regular hammer for him, he uses it to crush the other kids' skulls. They're made of porcelain, I think, by the way. They aren't like real children. But it begs the question as to what exactly are these things? Do they just have the souls of kids inside of them? I am seriously hoping that one of you Little Nightmares experts can answer these questions that I have, but please wait until the end of the video because I might actually discover them myself. Also, that counted back there, so take a drink of water. Walking into a classroom, we would see a teacher moving in erratic and strange ways while the students sat attentively, until their attention turns to us and they beat us down. It's also here that I noticed that they're the same size as us, which I bring up because back at the Hunter's house we saw that one kid at the table who was significantly bigger than us, so I don't know, proportions. I am actually wondering now if this is like another game I covered called Among the Sleep, where children who are traumatized and extremely fearful have a distorted world view, where they're so young and mentally violated that their minds have no choice but to view everything as distorted, like people or adults being monsters because that's the only way that their young brains can make sense of things. Just something that came to mind. I intend to look up official stuff later. But after making it into the next room, I thought it was safe to go and grab a key, except I wasn't. That teacher came in here long neck style. I respect her neck game, but she could have just walked in here to peek around. I mean, she sped walked all the way over here, but only stretched her throat out to look for us. It didn't seem necessary. Opening a cabinet, creaking, but nobody hears or sees us peeking, we start sneaking our way out while the teacher is wigging out. And just take a look at her face. Expressionless, unblinking, her movements as her heels clack on the wooden floors are disturbingly not human. She smacks her ruler on the students' tables, getting in their faces, and it reminds me of when I was a kid and the teachers loved to assert their dominance and control over all of us just because they were adults. Not all, but many would use their age and position of authority to impose themselves on us. This section reminded me of that. It's been a while since I've been a kid, but I'll never forget how they tried to make us feel little. Exit stage left, elevator up. We would walk into this room with a feral doll kid, scrawling chalk all over the floor since he already used up the blackboard on the wall. But what he was drawing was weird. Eyes. And these reminded me of the ones back on the Maw. Coincidence? I think not. Looking closer, it is a multitude of eyes all over one another. Hundreds of eyes. We also see a drawing of a tower emitting a signal. And again, I'm thinking aliens low-key. However, it is on the very left, on the edge, where I see a man in a hat. Whatever's going on here, I think it's affecting everyone and everything. And this kid, leashed to the wall, has been going insane with it. Also, look at the hat that he's wearing. It's the same one I'm wearing. The same as the gnomes. There's gotta be something connecting everything. The lady, the Maw, the TV, the tall man. It's like all of these little clues and hints keep showing up, and we know that there's a bigger picture here, but we need more puzzle pieces to complete or see anything. Grabbing the steel pipe, smashing him on the skull, bashing through the door, making our way into the next room, we find the teacher again, who I believe is punishing a student, smacking him. Avoiding her in the library, we safely make our way to a chess room where we would see a map of the world with a giant red eye on it. Now chat, what do you guys think this means? Because to me, I'm looking at this and the first thing that pops into my head is that this is the future. We're way into the future. Some post-apocalyptic setting where we are the remnants of humanity. The world ended a long time ago. Some messed up crap happened and this is what's left. And the reason I say this is because the continents in the map are unrecognizable compared to our maps today. I'm not an astrophysicist, but I did learn on a YouTube video that continents are actually always moving. Looking it up, they creep usually around 2 to 10 centimeters per year or 1 to 4 inches in freedom units, depending on the plate. And at that rate, a continent shifting even a few hundred miles would take tens of millions of years. To crash continents together like this map shows to actually reform a new supercontinent, you would be looking at something on the order of 50 to 250 million years older than your mom, and that's enough time for me to hit 30k subs. That's enough time for mountain ranges to rise and fall again. So, if this really is Earth, it's an ancient one reborn. The oceans have lost their names, the lands have drifted back together, and the old world has been swallowed by time itself. But I know some of you sharp knives are thinking, if this world is so ancient that the continents have moved, how are there still buildings, TVs, and remnants of a relative modern life? I concur. It doesn't add up. At least not in a natural sense. But I think that's the point. The devs want this conundrum to be noticed. Here in this nightmare, entropy traps the things that we see. Everything that should have turned to dust is stuck in a state of endless deterioration. The contradiction is intentional. It's part of the supernatural decay that defines the setting we're in. At least that's what I'm thinking so far. After beating some mannequins in a kitchen and taking one's head off to wear it, Mono disguises himself to make his way through a madhouse packed with wild, shrieking children. Rambunctious, unhinged, and utterly without order. Makes me miss the gnomes a bit more. After our hammer-wielding Mono exterminates more of these pests, he finally finds 9 hanging from her feet. Releasing her, Mono and 6 can continue their journey. Dropping a piano through a floor and finding the teacher playing another one, as the two are about to leave through a vent, the teacher hears them. And my god, this was freaky. Her neck is fantastic! Finally out of her reach, and exhausting all of the neck jokes I can think of, 6 and Mono trudge through the rain and make their way across a giant chasm. It seems something caused a massive fissure that tore through the earth, but not only that, just like the warped furniture with the hangman back in the first game, the buildings here are bent and curving towards the center. But we would need to hurry on because 6 was freezing from the rain. Luckily, we would find cover and also find her iconic yellow raincoat. Now showing her true colors and gaining a stat boost to her water resistance, she won't be getting sick anytime soon. However, they would need to slog their way through the hospital anyways, where the doctor here was, well, let's just say he's not somebody insurance will cover. Discovering another TV, Mono attempts to connect and enter it once again, but when he gets close to the door, for some reason, 6 pulls him out again. I wonder why she won't let us get close to the door. Taking a look around, The hospital looks like it ran out of funding. The patients are dismembered mannequins, and all throughout this place are body parts strewn about. In fact, in one section, there's a killer hand that chases Mono around and tries to kill him, but Mono is able to beat that hand off multiple times, just to make sure it's down. Always double tap. However, 6 was doing something weird when I came back out. I don't know about you, but there was something off and weird about that behavior, man. And then, like, actually stopping to really look, to zoom in and look at the mannequin's finger, she broke the mannequin's pinky. And am I just imagining it? Or when she broke the finger, it kind of made like a weird noise? It could just be me, but what if these mannequins were humans at one point? I mean, we are living in a reality where kids can become gnomes after all, so is this theory too out of this world? If it's true, 6 doing this? Kinda dark. Should we start calling her Sadistic 6? Entering another part of the hospital, the mannequins here would try to kill Mono if he wasn't looking at them. At one point, a bunch of mannequins would try to get me through their doors and chase me down halls, and I did get frustrated here because of the mannequin that was blocking the door. I didn't know that Mono would just auto-aim at it as we walked closer to it, so I kept trying to aim at it manually, and it would throw me off because it would just cause me to die. But eventually, we make it through and into a padded room with a bathtub and shower heads. Now, this was especially weird because in the tub there seemed to be a regular body in there, and it looked organic, not plastic or whatever the mannequins are made of, but it was covered in this disgusting goop, almost like a slug. And it was in jars too. And I forgot to mention this, but there have been shadow children throughout the game. However, when Mono tries to go touch them, they just disappear with a static noise. I wanted to bring them up earlier, but I kept forgetting. I'm not sure what they are, but this one was trying to reach up into the bathtub, so I don't know if there's a connection. 360 no scope with a flashlight through the dark, we keep the mannequins at bay, and we make our way back to 6. But we aren't done with this nightmare yet. In fact, we stumbled into something even more unsettling. A room lined with rows of masks. And not just any mask, my fellow viewer. Some of them look like the very same faces of the monsters we've been running from. The chefs, the janitor. Some, I don't even think I could recognize. But all this time, I thought these creatures were wearing masks, and now here is the proof. But still, for what? Is it vanity? Is it uniform or something darker? The texture of the masks make it worse. They don't exactly look plastic, and they don't even look like clay. They look like they're made from something organic, flesh-like, thick and waxy, as if peeled from something living. Whoever or whatever these creatures are, they're hiding themselves, for sure this time, wearing humanity like a costume. But passing into the following area, we would begin to hear loud thumps. Something huge and wicked was there. Entering this room and crawling out from the shadows above, clinging to the ceiling like a Spider-Man, comes him, the Doctor. Strange. His every movement, wet and heavy, his bloated head, his pale skin, his lips stretched into a constant grimace. And now, this doctor's got 2 new patients. However, he's still operating on one as he pops his head off. Now, I actually sat here and I stared at this section for quite some time because it was weird. It was weird seeing all this blood on the floor, but not seeing any bodies. I mean, sure, he could have just carried them somewhere, but then I started replaying the part where he removes the mannequin's head. First, when he picks it up, its head kind of rolls forward on its own, and then after, its legs start kicking like it has a reflex. The body itself looks oddly normal, like a human body, and plus again, all these mannequin body parts are laying around. I don't know. I can't help but think that this doctor is changing people into mannequins. Somehow, part by part, he's replacing their flesh with plastic. Maybe with the goop back in that tub. But it's in the next room that makes me think this is actually what is going on. As he hits the lamp, the light swings and sheds lights on the bodies laying in hospital beds. The first one that he checks in on, he pulls at its head, and it stretches more like flesh instead of just popping off. Observing all of them as we try to sneak around, they look like they have skin, not complete dolls. They look amputated where the doctor inserted prosthetics in, and some of them have bandages over their heads that look a little bloody. But then, Mona would get into the morgue, where it's the nail in the coffin for me. So to speak, of course. Blood and guts in the sink, actual cadavers with those death tags on their toes. I'm sure he reanimates them and that they can feel everything, and then he just like replaces them with mannequin parts. Still not convinced? I do wonder why this particular person was kept alive like that. That doctor came rushing over here like he cared about whoever that was. But soon, he would be rushing over to Mono and 6. I just want to point out that 6 ran way ahead of Mono back there, basically left him. She really said, every man for himself. But now it is time to incinerate the doctor. Is 6 good? No hesitation, she sat down really close to the fire. Heat, embers, smoke, smell in her face. I mean, I know that thing was a nightmare, but she is just treating this like it's a campfire. I'm not gonna lie, that's a bit demented. She even got Mono frozen, dead hanging on the lever still because he's asking the same questions I am. Well, moving on, we don't need treatments anymore, so we leave the hospital. It does suck to be those mannequins. But back out in the torrential rain, the duo will make their way across. But then, they would start to see bodies hitting the floor. But these people didn't scream, instead they croaked. I wonder why those people were jumping off in the first place. Going up into an apartment, one of those people, well, looking at its warped face, I don't know if it's a person, but close enough, we'll stick to people. He smashes through the floor before smashing his head into a TV. Down a hall, a woman would be mesmerized by a TV. Except there's nothing on, unless she sees something we don't. I think it has something to do with this giant tower outside. Remembering the chalk drawing that the porcelain kid was scrawling on the floor, I'm looking at the skyscraper with a blasting light up top, and I am sure it's emitting a signal. And the buildings seem to open up and converge in a way towards it. But if the kid drew that tower, and it's actually here, are we going to see those thousands of eyes and also the tall man? Are this tower, the TVs around the Pale City, and the tall slender man from the first game connected? Pressing on, the two would enter a building, but it would start to collapse, sending everything careening below. However, 6 would get caught, and when the rubble settles, we see that 6 is stuck underneath. Luckily, me and Mono aren't the type to leave anybody behind, so we free her. It's a team effort. There is no I in team. It's not about me, it's about we. Plus, I can't open this door without her help, but let's ignore that. Also, don't watch my Kingdom Come Deliverance videos. That does not reflect who I am as a person. I help people. I would not actually do what I do in those videos. I am a team player. Heading to a kid's bedroom, we see some drawings, but one stands out to me. A man in a fedora, wearing a suit and tie. We also see those eyes. Foreboding. Heading into the living room, the entire space seems to lean towards the television. The cabinet, the shelves, they bend slightly forward, like gravity itself is being pulled by the static glow. As Mono steps closer, the light begins to warp around him. His head begins to ache, his body starts to flicker, the edges of his coat and his hands are turning translucent, as if he's fading into the screen. The hum of the TV grows louder, the air thick with distortion, and for a moment, Mono's outline ripples like he's being rewritten by the signal itself. And at first, I thought the TV was trying to lure him in like a bad way. But then I started to watch the way that Mono was attempting to enter the TV with a rather fervent vigor. He's heeding a call. But what is in the TV? What's behind the door that Mono feels pulled in to want to discover? And why does Six keep pulling us out? Her screech. That was horrendous to hear. And the tall man, oh, he's real. Immediately going after her, Mono plunges himself into the TV to try and rescue her, but there is something wrong. This time, we didn't get to go to wherever the tall man was. But also, as we were portaling, there was this giant fleshy eye watching us, reminiscent of the portraits in the lady's residence back in the Maw. I think that is what redirected Mono, preventing him from following the tall man. But why? I thought he wanted Mono. Wasn't he calling to us? Portaling through TVs, manipulating a few TV people, and even watching several stare out and fall off the building as the tower watches them. I get the feeling that's where Six is. Going through the city, these TV people kind of mirror the real world in that everybody is always staring at their phones, always in front of a screen. But not you. Not you watching this video. You're fine. Please continue. You're good to go. I mean, everybody else, of course. But on a serious note, I think the TV people melted their faces off, gluing themselves to the screens. They're almost like iPad kids, too, when they can't get screen time to watch Cocomelon. Soon, Mono would find a TV with a silhouette of Six on the screen. He tries to pull her out, but he can't yank her out as fast as she yanks us out. But it doesn't matter, because the tall man won't let her leave. Won't let us leave. The tall man, like something out of the ring, presses out of the TV and rises to lock eyes onto Mono as he tries to jack the door up. Climbing up, Slender Man in his Fallout outfit would bend down to come in after him. Trying to escape safely under the floorboards, he would find a window where he could pull planks out, but the tall man would find him and quickly begin teleporting closer and closer. But just in the time of Nick, Mono hops out the window and slides down the roof of a train. Yet the tall man is right behind him. He's on his heels, chasing him down through a car, and Mono almost died, but he was able to pull a lever to detach the cars, separating the two in an ominous way. However, the nightmare continues. As the train begins to speed ahead faster and faster, no brakes until it smashes into a wall. Last stop, Nightmare Alley. Holding the pain in his side, he follows a shade kid through the tunnel, and I begin to think, wait, what if that shadow kid is him? But like another version of him or something, because when you look closer, in the right light, as the shadow kid is about to climb the ladder, it looks like he's wearing Mono's drip. The clothes, the hat, and all the shade kids we've seen were all in places that Mono has been. Time we already know is wonky. You know what, never mind, I guess I'm just being crazy. But, climbing out onto the street, the tall man finds us again. And Mono, knowing that he can't outrun him, gives up. Except, Mono hadn't given up. Just like Six, something awakens in him, and he begins to fight back using the Force. The young Padawan force pushes the tall man back, its face now hollowed out, really looking like a Fallout ghoul now. It tries to get angles on him, but what he doesn't know is that Mono is him. Stepping into the pink light, Mono finds himself once again sprinting towards that door, only this time when it opens, he's run into a world where the rules of reality no longer apply. Objects floating all around, doors that lead him in loops, stairwells to more liminal spaces, and the only thing guiding him is the sound of music. A familiar chime, a familiar tune. But soon, he would find where the music was coming from. A box. But not just any box. Six's music box. The same one from the beginning, where we found her trapped in the hunter's basement. Here in this room full of toys and warped paintings, a monstrous Six slowly lurches forward, no longer recognizable if not for her yellow coat. She's protecting her music box. But what's turned her into this big nightmare? Was it the tall man? The flesh eyes? This dimension? Mono doesn't know. But what he does know is that somehow the music box is what's holding her here. So, he needs Six to lay it down so that he can destroy it. Picking up a hammer from her oversized briefcase that she was sleeping on when we found her first back in Little Nightmares 1, we carry it over and drop the hammer on the music box. Now this sends a shockwave that ripples in colored tones throughout the air, one that plunges Mono into a void before quickly warping him back to Six, where the dimension was beginning to collapse and melt. But that's not all, as Six, enraged by what Mono has done, screeches and begins to chase him, her overgrown frame smashing through the door frames, disfigured fingers clawing at the floor trying to grab him, her arms, legs, and bent feet twisting in painfully broken ways, thrashes ahead like a beast. This isn't the Six we're used to seeing, at least not in this abominable form. It's as if her body itself can't contain the rage consuming her. The air fills with distorted cries and raspy breaths as the world collapses around them, the nightmare reaching its final inevitable breaking point. But I wonder, does time work differently here? What if Six was stuck here for a god-awful long time? Because outside of this realm, Mono had only been gone for a short moment. However, here, it could have been ages. Plus, the influence of whatever beautifully corrupting energy is in this realm, maybe that was just enough to transform her. She grew up here from a child to a monster. Or what if she was always going to turn into that monster, even without being in this realm? Like, what if that's just what she naturally grows up to become? Just a theory. Finding her, and the box once more, she one-shots Mono, sleeping him. So, he would need to get creative and try to distract her and move her out of place. And after getting slapped a bunch of times, he would give it a great big chop that knocks the light out of everything. But Mono's consciousness would start fading back in slowly. Hearing the distorted music box struggling to keep its tune, he would get up and see Six, desperately still trying to protect her box. But Bro knows what must be done to save his friend, so picking up the axe, he would dragon shout a Fusuoda, making her wince, and with this opportunity, he would deliver Kingdom Come. Real quick, I want to go back in time and point something out. The music box. While we were trying to destroy it for a while, portaling through doors and trying to get her to move, if you pay attention to the handle on the music box, it's turning clockwise. But right at the very end there, before Kingdom Come Deliverance, the music box handle is turning counterclockwise, which coincides with the music now playing in reverse and with Monster 6 turning back to her normal self. That's why I have the theory that she was stuck in this dimension for a really long time. And in here, she just aged into that abomination. Gotta wonder also how that affected her already low-key on the edge demented psyche. Like, imagine just being stuck here and she probably just went insane. But okay, these flesh eyes. The last thing we have had yet to see is now finally here, and it's chasing the kids. Their eyes watching them as their grotesque flesh consumes the world around them. The whole place is alive. Every step Mono and Six take is one of desperation to escape being entombed. Now, normally, I would be worried. I would be. But I know that these two, with the power of friendship, are going to make it out of this nightmare together. Stuck in the dark and wandering around the prison realm atop pulsating flesh, Mono wonders why Six dropped him. Why did she let go? Were they not friends? Did she see Mono as weak and as somebody who would slow her down? No, that's impossible, because he freed her from the hunter. He rescued her multiple times, and there was also more than enough time for her to help him up so that they could both get out. Unless it's the same reason that Six kept pulling him out of the TV. Mono would have more than enough time to ponder these questions over and over again until it drove him mad. Because just like Gojo Satoru, he would be sealed in here, but nobody would be coming to save him. But even though Mono would become the tall man and repeat the loop, sending a version of himself out into the TV, repeating the cycle, and 6 would go on to somehow end up on the Maw, these little nightmares don't end. There are still more questions, and like I said, the theories and the journeys are what make this series one of the best. This is Low and Alone. They've woken up inside of an unfamiliar place with a large mirror smashed behind them. What I can tell you, based on the Steam description, is that they are in a world called the Nowhere, and the part of the world they're about to embark on is called the Spiral. However, are they prepared for the nightmares that lie ahead? Over to the left and noticing a mask in a briefcase, it kind of annoys me that I can't get a better look at it because it feels like a nod to something. But going to the right and climbing on top of a seat, Lo notices a picture of the Maw. After throwing a shoe at a button and connecting a bridge, Lo and Alone head outside where they would embrace arid desertlands, to find themselves on these dunes where the scorching sands and blistering heat take the lives of even the largest creatures. How did this guest even get here? Scaling the sheer tall wall, Alone and Lo climb a wooden ladder, passing by crows both dead and alive. They enter the necropolis. Now, something feels wrong. The air is heavy with emptiness, like the skeleton of a city long forgotten, yet they can't shake the feeling that it isn't entirely dead. Maybe it's this baby's binky hanging beside a man frozen in stone. Or maybe it's the distant sight of countless bodies wrapped tight and strung across the skyline. Somebody put them there. But why? Running deeper into the hollow carcass of a city, the two would find a big box overflowed with skeletons of countless crows, and I start to wonder who's collecting these and why. But the other thing is that Lo is wearing a skeleton crow mask as well, so does he have a connection to the crows? But I thought to quickly look up what crows signify in dreams, and I think it would be fitting to tell you that they represent death, omens, and the shadow self, which, if you've seen some of my psychoanalysis videos, you'll have heard me talk about Carl Jung's theory of the shadow self, the repressed and unconscious selves that are inside of all of us, inside of Lo. Recalling that I hate puzzles, I look up the answer to solve this puzzle that isn't really a puzzle. It turns out I just needed to take out my bow and shoot an arrow to drop this box. Doing so, we're able to ascend into a bizarre sight. You see, somebody had killed crows and hung them all around this room, passing by dried blood, gears that are still turning thanks to the winds blowing outside, and crow remains. Are they crows or ravens? I think ravens are bigger, no? I am honestly not a dentist, I don't know my birds. But past the remains and turning gears, a truth begins to sink in. Lo and Alone's instincts were right. They aren't alone. Something immense nearly killed the two simply by just standing up. The destruction it caused using the building as a platform to push itself up was unbelievable. Opening the doors back outside, the two would find a closet. But when they opened it, a body bag would jump out and scare them, knocking them to the stone floors. However, they would find an umbrella made of bird feathers, which they would use to ride the winds up to zipline across. And seeing that eye again, engraved on the side of a building while hearing the low rumbles and thumping of whatever that gargantuan beast was, I could not help but feel like somebody was watching me. That might have been a feeling all kids in the nowhere could relate to. Jumping up and down repeatedly to break the floor in, Alone and Low would drop down to the floor below, but that wasn't the best idea. A hand, effortlessly smashing through rock walls to grab one of the statue men, caused the roof to cave in. Had it not been for their quick reaction, they would have been squashed. But they weren't safe yet, because whatever that was, it knew that they were there, and it was looking for them. Its eye gazed and searched before its hand once again crashed through, pulling on a pillar and collapsing the ceiling above, but luckily, the floor descended below just in time, saving the children. Being made to crouch through a dark tunnel, each step made a wet, squelching sound that clawed at their nerves. Black eggs. The tunnel opened into a shadowed hall, and that's when they saw them. Bodies, wrapped, suspended. Their silhouettes swayed in the stale air. One bag had a hand hanging out with those black eggs on it, and in that moment it clicked. The hanging corpses across the city were not random indeed. Something had put them there, and we were walking right into its nest. Almost immediately, as if they were waiting, beetles the size of Low and Alone crawled from out of the walls and immediately set upon them. The assault was relentless. They continued to swarm, but with the power of friendship and Low's bow, along with Alone's wrench, they squashed the insect invaders. Shortly after, they'd find their way out. But, upon their ascent from this hole, they would finally see what monster was stomping around the necropolis. A baby, the size of a building, waddling past, humming around and looking for something to play with. Heading into a room, we'd find more umbrellas, but we'd also find out that the umbrellas that we've been using were not just made only with bird feathers, but also seemingly with human bones. Such a child-friendly game. So at this point, some of you are probably wondering if we're ever going to see 6. Well, all I have to say about that is, after the events of Little Nightmares 1, 6 actually, officially escaped the Maw. Looking at the Steam description for the Dark 6 costume, it refers to her as the girl who escaped the Maw. But speaking of escape, we need to find a way out of here because this baby monster is nothing to play with. With just a look, it could turn them to stone, and this explains how everyone in this empty city was melted into stone. But, despite evading the baby's eye, it would find Low and Alone as they were trying to sneak through a building. But even then, they were not in the clear, because the baby would be waiting for them. Jarringly, Low awakens to find himself no longer in that nightmare, but instead another one. He's in a padded room, and this institution doesn't seem like a welcoming place for a patient, but instead something more of a prison for a subject. And that's when someone makes Low run and hide under his bed. Having returned to the necropolis under the night rain, as the moon haunts them, they both head into the next room to find chalk drawings. Upon closer inspection of the diagrams, it reveals something having to do with mirrors. Mirrors seem to have a notable focus in this story, but I have a feeling it's not simply about reflecting lights. And this is where things start to get bonkers. The baby, who's been playing around the city since the sun was out, is right in their way. She's humming and cooing, and there are toys all over, but what ends up happening is, as Lo and Alone start trying to cross the bridge, the crows that were hanging about get startled by their approach. And when this happens, they make a lot of noise. And as a result, the baby would release this monstrous groan and once again seek the kids out. And so now it's a game of trying to get by without being seen. But the story continues on. Lo and Alone take cover behind large blocks and head up into a bell tower. Now, once up there, realizing that there really is nowhere else they can go, banking on the monster baby giving them a place to go, at least I suppose, Lo shoots an arrow at a rope to release the bell, which had been tied up to prevent it from making any noise. Here's the thing. When that bell goes bong, the sound resounds out loud and the baby hears this. As a consequence, the monster baby would stomp over and start peering through, looking for what made that noise. But she doesn't find Lo or Alone because they went to hide near the box. So like a wrecking ball, Monster Girl reaches in and rips the bell out of the tower to start playing with it like a toy. And in doing so, she opened up a hole in the wall, giving Lo and Alone a means of continuing their journey to find a way out of the necropolis. With the baby in a corner somewhere, by way of sorting another puzzle out through this building, the two would navigate their way through and out to the other side. And as they were riding the winds across, they'd see the baby again, who has the attention span of, well, a baby. Because she isn't playing with the bell anymore. The giant baby babbles to itself as it goes forward, heading in the same direction that we are. As they press deeper into the windy city, they try to move carefully, slipping past without making a sound. But the Titan isn't far. It looms over a crumbling wall again, searching for them. Now, this time, despite being able to sneak away, the baby catches on. It begins tearing through everything to get to us. It starts smashing the roof down, crashing through walls, and yanking out pillars. And the kids are running as fast as their little legs will take them. But there's just one more issue. They've reached a dead end once again. And the monster baby sees this. So it places both of its hands underneath the building and picks up the entire floor we're standing on. So there is quite literally nothing these kids can do as they're stuck on this platform. It even picks up the rattle that was in the middle, removing the only cover we had, but luckily there was a box that conveniently fell down, giving cover. Seriously, somebody come get their baby. For a moment, it almost had us, but we were saved by the bell. Well, saved by the crows, because a murder of them fly in, screeching and pecking at her. The baby cries and stumbles away, swatting at them in panic. Talking about birth control, you gotta wonder if Lo and the crows have a connection, because why did all of a sudden those crows choose to distract the baby? Like, just think about it for a second. What if Lo imagined himself being saved and, he was seeing all of these crows along the way, so what if he thought about the crows doing that attack and he just manifested it into existence, right? That would be pretty cool. What if his power is, like, to manifest things that he wants, which I think would be a really cool power to have. Imagine that. Oh, I'm gonna manifest $1 billion into my bank account. Boom. But one of the things that happens next, which ties back to the chalk drawings of the mirrors here, is Lo and Alone float down and land in front of a mirror. And what I want to do here is point out a few things. First, we see someone standing behind the mirror with their hand on it like they're holding the mirror up. That's just creepy. But then you actually zoom in and look inside of the mirror, and there is what appears to be an entirely different world. You see large metal pipes and a green tinge of light that isn't reflective of this world. But what ends up happening next reveals the significance and meaning of the chalk mirror drawings that we saw. They just entered the mirror and came out of another mirror in a completely different environment. So what does this mean? It shows us that the mirrors are a means for traversal in between dimensions. However, there's just one concern, and it ends up actually turning into one of the biggest and saddest things, but I don't want to spoil it for you. Just take note on how Lo comes out relatively well, but Alone, well, she smashes through the mirror, breaking it. The mirror doesn't treat her the same way it treats Lo. But checking to see if she's alright, Lo helps her up. Now chat, am I crazy, or just trying to shoe in something that I want to see? Does this place look like the Maw? Because this sort of seems like the beginning area of Little Nightmares 1, where Six woke up on top of the briefcase. I wonder what she's up to, by the way. And also, plip-plopping to the next room over, even this hanging man, despite being exceptionally large to the tall man, appears quite similar to what Six sees, with the man hanging in the chair and everything. Another thing that I want to turn your attention to is the reddish stuff that is all around the room. There's some on the floor that's dried up, and some glopped up on the corner of a drain, and there's even some leaking out of the pipes. Now, you might think it's blood, but it's not. And we're going to talk about a theory that I have about this stuff soon. But picking up with the story, climbing into the pipe on the right, going over more of this weird gloop, it's coming out to see this that makes me wonder if we are on the Maw. It's the way the void stretches upward and back into the narrow chasm of fog and steel, bodies hanging in rows above them, swaying like grotesque ornaments. The ropes creak softly, and a low hum whirs and echoes through the hollow dead space. And the green, sinister and ominous, stuck to the air like some kind of biochemical agent, reminds Lo and Alone they need to keep finding a way out of this nightmare. However, as they press on, an imposing silhouette of a woman would come up to a window and then close the shutter on it. Seeing this, Lo and Alone would just freeze and stare at one another for a few seconds, petrified by the sight of what they just saw. And the thing is, the moment doesn't go away, because right next door, as Lo picks up a lollipop off the floor, which, by the way, left some of that same red residue we saw earlier, they see her shadows again, right on the other side of the metal door. We hear clanking, and again, the small children freeze in place, wondering if, at any moment, she was going to open the door. Realizing that sitting to stay and find out wasn't the smartest play, he throws the lollipop away at the door and lifts the tiny gate to move on. But what you end up doing is picking up over in the next room where we finally see who she is, or rather what it is. It is this disgusting figure of a female with 6 arms rolling on something. She almost seems half doll, half monster because we hear metal squeaks but also squelching whenever her muscles jerk. But the interesting thing is, and perhaps it's just me being an overthinker again, you guys know me, BHG goes on random tangents, hates puzzles and loves his wife, but as I was saying, the interesting thing about this is she seems to be stressed out to no end looking for something, and I really want to know what she's looking for. But what happens next is the two enter this hallway, and there's a few things to point out here. The first thing you notice are the pictures on the wall. You guys ever have your picture hung up on the wall for like employee of the month or something like that? Me neither. But that's what this is, and the monster we saw earlier, that's her. And her smiling doesn't make her any less menacing. But the question therein lies, how did they take her picture? Or if this was drawn or painted on canvas, how did they get her to sit still? I think it's interesting that this society of monsters even has the capacity to do these kinds of things, as it seems to be a very human thing. And of course, on the wall are other employees, but there is one empty space on the wall where it seems like a painting had been removed, so I wonder if that is what she's looking for. But the other thing to also take note of, well, it's probably not what she's looking for, because she was looking like little piles of papers, so a giant painting like that wouldn't. I take that back. But the other thing to also take note of are the barrels of goop. They're are a few here knocked over, and considering the candy we saw earlier, I think this is the melted candy, but it's just odd. However, the story goes on. Into a room full of filing cabinets. And it's no wonder why she can't find anything. Noticing the design of her character, I can't help but theorize the meaning behind her design. She reminds me of somebody who is the type of individual who has their career as their entire identity, and having her 6th arm probably alludes to how she was constantly being pulled in multiple directions to supervise and manage multiple projects for this corporation. A little side note for real life. The only people who are ever going to remember how hard you worked are your loved ones. Not the people you worked with, not the company you worked for. But I love my wife. Now, right as we're about to leave the archives, because of the loud sound the door makes when we pull the lever, she hears us. Surrounded by piles and piles of rotten candy, some of it melting into the ground with a bunch of critters seemingly eating it, what ends up happening is the two enter a room filled with even more barrels of this melted down candy. But the sickening thing is, this room is swarming with these creepy crawling bugs en masse, and they are all over this reddish pink candy stuff, and the only thing keeping them from also trying to, or I guess also eating low and alone, is the light that they use to get by. But the question essentially becomes, what the hell is this stuff? Because even though it looks like candy, what it's made of is concerning, more so coupled with the fact that the bugs wanted to eat the kids as well. Now, what we end up finding out is that we are actually in a candy factory. Lo and Alone are in horrific awe at the sheer size and scale of this operation. You've got workers on the floor inspecting, you got one guy in a suspended seat grinding this guck that's getting pumped in everywhere, and this guy is not working. So somebody needs to call the supervisor on him. He's just watching TV. I guess the tall man must be interesting. But this is basically where the candy is being made. So now we have to ask, where are they getting the materials to make this candy? More directly, what is the candy made of? So if you guys can recall, through all of the games we've played before, the running theory, at least for me, is that all of the food we see in the nowhere are what used to be children. Essentially, if you're eating the food, you're a cannibal. And so if this theory is correct, then all of this pink-red goop is basically human guts grounded and liquefied into this stuff. I guess that's also why the bugs were eating the candy and also trying to eat us as well. But it begs the question, how many kids are in the nowhere for there to be so much food, quote-unquote food? Wading through the ocean and past the mountains of dead bodies, what basically happens next is Lo and Alone solve a bunch of puzzles and get out of a freezer where they'd find themselves outside. And you can even hear the cawing of birds, but also see hot air balloons, which, after having just played Very Little Nightmares, makes me start to see a connection point. But there will be even more for you to notice soon. Pressing on in a room full of monitors, we would see the supervisor again, straight stressing. First, she can't find whatever it was she was looking for. Then, Lo and Alone mess with the power, so she can't figure out how to fix the screens. She has a nuclear meltdown, because she's just a girl, and because she can't even. Rolling away into the following room, this is where things would start to go off the rails. In my experience, most girls just cut their hair or something, but with her gone, Lo and Alone would attempt to make a break for it. But that's when we could hear her growling and scowling through the pipes, and I would even stop to check the noise. But that was a mistake. I don't even know how she found me. I was hidden in the shadows just as well as Alone all the way over there. But next time, I hid where Alone was and the supervisor couldn't find us, so she just rushed off. Unfortunately, not far enough away, because dropping down, she'd be right on top of us again. I wonder what conveniently made that noise and saved us. Plot armor? 6? Nah, there's no way to even prove that 6 distracted her for us. Plus, she's not the type to help others unless they're useful to her. Popping open the grate, the loud sound it makes isn't so great because it alerts 6-armed mommy who comes barreling down. While Lo runs to open the way ahead, Alone takes her sweet time, strolling over without a care in the world as if her life isn't in danger too, to come help us open this. The soup might have gotten us too, if it weren't for those meddling steam pipes keeping her at bay. But even then, she wouldn't give up, because when the two jump into a room with boxes, and by the way, these boxes have papers with spirals on them, so who here can tell me what this is a reference to? Turned into doughy real quick. Poppy playtime. Heading down a dark hall. At the very end would be a long light brimming with energy. Ethereal voices whispering, and as Lo gets close, the whirring of resonance power begins to stir until he touches it. And I don't know how many of you noticed this, but if you listen closely, you can actually hear music coming from the mirror, from the other world we're about to enter. I thought that was a dope detail. Checking his map, Lo looks around to see which way to go next. But one thing we want to keep in mind is how while Lo is able to portal through into the mirror just fine, Alone has a more painful experience doing this, in that she brutally crashes through, leaving shards of shattered glass all over the floor. So what I want you to do is take your thumb and pointy finger and grab the thought off of your computer or phone screen and plug the thought out of there and put it to your right temple. store that baby in there. Kudos if you actually did it, you're really cool. So, after the events leading up to their escape from the candy factory, Lo and Alone would work with gnomes to try and navigate their way out of this maze of a building. But, along the way, they have a really warm and cozy moments where they ignite a furnace and just sit there, vibing with one another, just enjoying good times and good company amongst the crackles of fire. But that brief snapshot of a good time, in time, doesn't last. Taking an elevator up into a dark place, luckily there was a flashlight, the two would try to find a way and restore the power. But on the way, they find these creepy dolls. Have any of you guys ever read the Goosebumps series? And for those of you who did, have you, or do you remember Slappy the Dummy? Or I guess that's kind of old. What about Dead Silence? Have you guys seen the movie Dead Silence? It came out in 2007, so even that might be way far back. I just realized it's been a while since we've had any, I guess Annabelle counts, right? No, that's not a ventriloquist doll. But anyway, Dead Silence has to do with this ventriloquist killer doll named Billy. Well, unluckily, those dolls were here. They were encased, but with the light shining above and highlighting them, their presence felt uneasy, like a warning. To the left, there was also a clock with doll arms all around it, hands of time. Also above, there was cheese, with fungus growing on it. And for some reason, that reminded me that the supervisor from back in the candy factory never found what she was looking for. But moving along, after Lo uses his infinite arrows to shoot specific buttons in a specific pattern, the power turns on. But yeah, the dolls are no longer on display, so that's going to be fun. Proceeding into a room with a picture of a spiral, pretty in your face at this point, I also noticed a hand on display. Flashbacks of Little Nightmares 2 in the hospital. Quick side note, Little Nightmares 3, less scary in my opinion, had easier puzzles too, but I still love this installment. Using my lack of depth perception because I'm getting old and don't know what kids mean when they say skibbity riz 6, 7, I fall to my death multiple times trying to jump onto this damn tub that reminds me of the one from Little Nightmares 2 in the secret room at the hospital. You guys remember that? It had the Shadow Kid there too, and in the jars there were all those weird greenish guts. Yeah. Anyway, after playing the piano and then hugging a gnome and looking at a large sign with a eye carved into it, also with a sword shoved in the middle of it, Alone and Lo would find a doll tied up to a pipe. Trudging outside in a thunderstorm through the torrential rain, and after almost dying in this falling wagon, the two best friends would find a tent. But something was weird about it, and even Lo would take caution with it, preemptively firing an arrow just in case. There was distorted music, but with no thing left to do, they would pull a lever. A most nefarious silhouette indeed. But Lo decides to go high, climbing up and continuing into a room with empty chairs. Okay. The next room over had a world map with chalk drawings that you could barely see and a purple suit jacket hanging on a coat hook. Now, when we grabbed a key hanging on the wall and we headed back outside into the room with the chairs, the closet door was swung open and there were now dolls sitting there, a big note for our dear boy as he rushes outside. But then something weird would happen. Carrying into a room, the lights would shut off, pattering on the... Is that a word, pattering? Oh, yeah, it is. Pattering on the floor could be heard, and once they entered the adjacent room, they were in for a fight. Because the dolls didn't hide anymore, they were real boys and girls. So, after arrows and wrenches, a good name for a bar by the way, they hop up and down and break the floor in and make their way forth under the boardwalks. Up above, giant creatures heavily stomped on by, and even more could be seen under the yellow carnival lights, enjoying everything that the carnival had to offer them. Climbing up a rope, past the painting of a man in a purple suit with a doll on his hand, we could see the scale of this forsaken place. Distracting Tweedledee with a crate of apples, I hope. Walking by more ogres with an appetite that rivals the Maw's guests. killing more dolls as the carnival goers played piñata, drowning one underwater so that we could use the platform to climb up, we would have to sneak down a long walkway, very quiet-like, because the slightest sound would awaken these dolls and they would beat us to death. After safe passage, the two would pull apart a dismembered Tweedledum who died trying to do magic. You gotta die doing what you love, I guess. Lo and Alone would figure, hey, why shouldn't we take some time to enjoy in the festivities as well? And so, they played this carnival game where you have to shoot the right metal boards, the correct, what are these called? Plinks? Targets? They're plinking, and they gotta shoot the right ones. But shortly after, they decided they wanted to ride the roller coaster next, so skipping the line by going under, they would do just that. But their good vibes and good high was brought to an all-time low because the mirror that Lo had on his map was smashed. A nightmare that they can't escape, but Alone was still optimistic. So what you end up finding out pretty quickly is that the atmosphere just shifts. When they go out, there's no more fun carnival lights, everything is dread dead and empty. It's like the world is telling Lo and Alone that playtime's over, and heading into a dark hall with a picture of the supervisor with candy on a door about to bust open because it's been filled with dead bodies, we would take an elevator up. With the question now being, if the mirror, their seemingly only means of escape, is destroyed, how are they going to get out of this nightmare? How are they going to get out of the spiral? Well, at this point, I'm pretty sure they're winging it because whether they meant to or not, they've finally come face to face with the shadow that was behind the tent. It's a sleeping man in a purple suit, and on his hand is a killer doll, capable of functioning without being attached to the purple man. These two monsters were incredibly scary and annoying to have to sneak past. Like, maybe it's not scary as you're playing it, but just imagine that you're actually in this situation. Yeah, you would be scared. And simply crouching by quietly isn't going to hack it, especially when pulling off these wooden planks makes so much noise. But luckily we're able to hide and distract the ventriloquist and its puppet by turning this saw blade. Wait a minute. Oh my god. Homie's out here just slicing other monsters up, getting deep inside of them and rearranging their guts. Pause. Unpause. Grabbing this handle on the table, we crank it like it's 2009, some of you guys won't get that reference, and we drop down into a pool of teeth. I feel like there's a joke somewhere here, but I can't put my tongue on it. Oh god, the puppet doesn't like my dad jokes and now he's trying to kill me. I feel like they could have fought or ran for a bit there, the good old divide and conquer, but what do I know? Also, again, just like the supervisor, the man in perp, actually I'm gonna look up his name. The Kin. His name is the Kin, by the way. The Kin only grabs Low and cages him up high, but Alone is left alone? He doesn't grab her? It of course works out because unlike a certain 5+1, Alone doesn't leave us alone. She sneaks around to come and save us. She's not going to leave us hanging. Using his bow to distract the Kin by shooting a jar holding a gnome, allowing it to escape, allows Alone to set us free. Looking for a way out, we pass by his bathroom. The Kin has a picture of himself in his own bathroom. Self-love maxing. That's another thing that the younglings are saying nowadays. Maxing. Ahem. However, soon Low and Alone would find somebody else locked up. A boy wearing a dunce cap. He's accepted his fate, confined to a cage under a table surrounded by more pictures of the Kin. Leaving him and crawling under the floorboards, the two would find out where that gnome ran off to. Should I have left it in its cage? Or did I set it free from this nightmare by granting it death? Chat, what do you guys think? Notice the smashed mirrors here too. It's like the Kin knows that mirrors are portals. But walking in and across wooden beams over the dining room where that caged boy was, the Kin was just walking out. Dropping down into a theater, we would find that boy again, except now he was on stage trying to perform for a few creatures in the crowd. The Kin was forcing this boy to perform, and at one point he would drop the balls. Understandably, he was scared of the consequences, but the ventriloquist would simply let him continue. It was a performance, after all. But while they were busy, I grabbed the key and I unlocked the door to the next room. However, that set off an alarm. Thinking they'd given up chase, the two kids would mosey through the entrance of the theater. But this was a huge mistake, because one way or another, they're gonna find us. They're gonna get us. The Kin was merciless. Now this is insane. The whole time, we were far off the ground and up in the sky. BioShock Infinite vibes. But that's when I realized we're surrounded by other balloons drifting in the sky, and for a moment it almost feels peaceful, until lightning strikes ours. So I need you guys to lock in and tell me what you think about this theory that I'm formulating. I think Little Nightmares 3 takes place before the events of Very Little Nightmares, which takes place before 1 and 2, because at the start of the game, the girl in the yellow coat wakes up in a hot air balloon, having just crashed into a roof. I believe that girl may have come from here, from the Carnival. Does this make sense or not? Girl in the yellow coat escapes from here on one of those hot air balloons, then crashes into the nest, Let me know what you guys think. But wait, didn't we see a few back at the candy factory? Wasn't there a few hot air balloons, or at least one that we saw? So maybe there's more to these hot air balloons. I just haven't figured it out yet. But picking up after the events of their balloon getting struck, things black out. Now, in case you weren't looking, when Lo wakes up in his padded room and hides his drawings, then takes them out when it's safe, something popped out along with his drawings. A doll, but not just any doll. That doll is Alone. The girl that's been with us this entire journey. The hair, the goggles, that is Alone. So I've got this theory that Lo is able to conjure up his imaginations. In this case, his friend, Alone, so that she can help him through his dark nightmare. Moving along, waking up after having crash-landed on a beach, we stand before a mansion decimated by the sands of time. Stepping inside, the place is coming apart as something keeps shifting, causing the whole place to rumble. And looking past this gate, we see a giant foot. Do you guys see it? I see it too. So that can't be good for us. Pushing on, this place has been overtaken by overgrown plants that Lo has to shoot with his arrow before they can get us. Mushrooms have also seemed to have infected this place and its residents. But it's when Alone hits a gong that we realize we are way in over our heads here, because whatever this is might be bigger than we initially thought. Heading into a room with a TV showing us the same images that the runaway kid saw on the TV he used to electrify the granny in the Secrets of the Maw DLC, as well as a drawing of eyes on eyes on eyes, which reminds me of Mono in the prison realm. We should also take a look at this picture of a dog peeing, because back in Little Nightmares 2, the room with the chessboard puzzle and the map where I had that theory about time and everything, that room also had a drawing of a dog peeing. And I didn't pay much attention to it before, but seeing that here too now makes me wonder its significance. But what ends up happening next is Alone and Lo enter a room, which seems to mirror Lo's room in that other nightmare. I almost wonder if this is the place that he's been teleporting to somehow. But where is that guy who keeps coming to the door and scaring Lo under the bed? But what ends up happening next is pretty significant. When Lo opens up his chute, the doll version of Alone comes out. This causes Alone to stumble back a bit, as she has just come to see the truth. That she is a materialized figment of his imagination. But despite this, the story continues. The doll version of Alone illuminates the worlds in ways that change their current reality. I think it enables them to move in little pockets of the real world whilst being in the nightmare world as well, allowing them to see new pathways and navigate through the spaces to make their way forward, but this doesn't mean that they would be allowed to leave. landing in a pile of leaves. As the eye and hand leave, we too make like a tree and leaf, through mushrooms. But these mushrooms release spores, and it can kill us if we're in it for too long. In fact, there's a guy back up there, and he seems to have suffered that fate. I wouldn't be surprised if whoever was taking care of Lo, quote-unquote taking care of Lo in the real world, was injecting him or feeding him something that has to do with these poisonous mushrooms. Pressing on, we would see a picture on a wall, and zooming in on it, it seems to be a house on a large piece of land that just juts ut and out, holding that house above. Almost like a nest sitting atop of a tower. But after sneaking silently like we're on a hill past these blind creatures who seem to just enjoy standing there, we make our way to another part of the Institute, where we would see another picture in between two tall, leaning cabinets. The picture looks like it's a long stairway that leads to a door or a portal, reminiscent of Little Nightmares 2. But, moving on, the giant hand would find the two again and begin chasing them into another room where he would show his face. I think this is the same guy that Lo keeps hiding from under his bed. But some of you guys have also pointed out that this boss might be a certain somebody from the Sounds of Nightmare podcast. Personally, I don't know yet. I'm not sure. I feel like it's plausible, it's definitely likely, but I'm just not 100% sure yet. Maybe when you guys get to that section in this video where we go over the podcast, you'll be able to convince me or change my mind, but advancing forward, Lo would unlock a door and head inside, where there would be a shadow child. The first one I've seen all game, but when we get close to it, it disappears quietly. And on the walls are a bunch of odd pictures. Zooming in, we see a boy with his head hung low on a chair. Above that, an X-ray of a brain. In the middle, it looks like a bunch of jars, but I can't tell what's inside of them. And on the right is a picture of somebody in a bed. There's pins and little ropes tying everything together, but I'm still figuring everything out. Could it be that somebody's running experiments on the kids? But with Mr. Doctor banging and screaming around, causing the place to shake, rattle, and roll, we need to figure out how to deal with him. So what I want to do here is call your attention to the bed, because it has the number 1331 on it. And by the way in which Lo looks and places his hand on it, makes me think this could be his bed or somebody that he used to know. But, then again, we're going to find something out in the podcast, and I'm pretty sure that ties back to this point here, because next to that chair is a recorder on a table. But that's not all, because if you look under the bed, there is something under there, and it looks like an apparatus, something that you put on somebody's head. I think the psychiatrist was probably working with a patient here, but I think seeing that number designation on the nameplate leans further into the experiment theory. Whoever was in this bed must have been subject 1331. Maybe this monster is the psychiatrist. Maybe he's the one conducting said experiments. I think it's also telling that the way the doctor is designed, the way his arms and legs snake into everywhere in the Institute is also kind of telling. Kind of like how a psychiatrist or psychologist might try to infiltrate one's mind. And that is a very extremely dark, dramatized, and exaggerated way to describe what they actually do. I'm just trying to point out the illusion that the game is trying to present to us. But carrying on. After the doctor chases us some more, we end up finding a mirror which Lo immediately tries to escape into, but alone doesn't want to go. Her hesitance gives the monster enough time to come and destroy their only means of escape. So at this point in the journey, I was wondering, Was there something on the other side that Alone was afraid of? Why the ambivalence? Or did she believe that they needed to stay and face the monster instead of running? I'll answer that soon with my own theory, but right now, with no other option, the two need to take him down. But when they do too. Rising up as the place is about to fall on them, Lone and Alo walk forward, past the doctor's head, past his limb that has no more hand-eye coordination, because it's dead, and to their last hope, another mirror that survived the fall. Low-key, I had some flashbacks there of Six and Mono. Thought for a second there that Alone was gonna drop him real low, pull a Mufasa on him. But okay, so guys, take your thumb and your pointy finger and take that thought out that you had stored in your mind, pull it from the right side of your head, and look at it, because it's time to explain the ending. First things first, Lo returns to the real world. He escaped the nightmare, escaped the nowhere, escaped the spiral, and snapped back to reality. We know this is because of the furniture in his room. Everything is proportionate, everything is normal sized. Lo isn't as little as he is in the nightmare, but his room does kind of look run down. So where exactly is he? That's unknown, and there's no real way to find out for now. But you might be asking me, BHG, what about the Institute? That padded room he was in. He would wake up from where he was in the spiral and into the padded room with his drawings, but the thing is, even there, things kind of look bigger. So, I think that even though he was there, that was just another layer of his nightmare realm. Think of Inception, dreams within dreams. However, taking the conversation over to the subject of his friend Alone, flat out, I believe Lo is one of those kids who gains powers when they enter the nowhere. My theory is that Lo can manifest his imaginations into existence. He willed Alone into a physical being, but hold that thought. Some people commented in my other videos saying that she was probably somebody real, somebody at the Institute that Lo knew, but part of me thinks that she wasn't actually real. And this is because we never actually see her face. You see, the human brain can't just make up a new face. You and I don't enter our dreams and see faces that we've never seen before. We would have had to at least glance at their face real quick, whether it's walking by them out and about in the real world or something somewhere on our phones or TV or something. So because Lo can't just make up a new face, he gave Alone a mask and goggles. That's why we never see her face, because she's entirely made up. But that's just my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me. You can keep your ideas. To me, she was 100% organic imagination. But this also explains why Alone didn't want to go into the mirror and why every time they portaled, it was harder on her. The realms, or whatever it being whatever forces lie in the halfway points between worlds, was trying so hard to stop her. The reason that she would crash through a mirror instead of phasing relatively easily was because she wasn't real, and every mirror jump, every time they got closer to their goal on Lo's map, every time they got closer to leaving the nowhere and returning to reality, it was trying to stop her. Until ultimately, it rejected her completely, leaving both of them alone. And Alone figured this out when she saw the doll version of her. And she wanted to live. She didn't want to be left alone, which is why she didn't want Lo to go. She wanted him to stay. Guys, it sucked. It sucked. Hearing her gasp with her dying breath, help? I mean, did you guys hear that? Did you hear the desperation in her voice? Without Lo there to power her being, she would disappear, cease to exist. She could not exist in the real world, where Lo's powers do not work, where his imaginations stay that way. Imaginations. But as I mentioned before, the kids we've been playing as through all of the games each have powers in deep and dark ways. I think, somehow, the Nightmare Realm gives them abilities. 6 can do her dark telepathy soul eater thing, Mono is a Jedi and can use the Force, but I believe that Lo can bring imaginations to life, which is kind of cool. And again, it's an OP power. Just imagine the possibilities. Lo brought Alone to life. In a real world sense, it makes sense, as kids, during moments, especially prolonged moments of intense stress and fear, can make up imaginary beings to help them through troubled times. I would go so far as to say that every nightmare Lo and Alone faced through the nowhere are representations of his real-life issues. There was the baby, the supervisor, the kin, the doctor, and I think the doctor is self-explanatory, because he was a figure of fear during his time in the Institute as his patient. The extent of or why he was even there is still a mystery, but the ventriloquist could be how he sees adults manipulating him or manipulating other children. There was that boy back in the carnival, and I wonder if he got away. In fact, it makes me think that all of these children are dealing with the same shit, just separately. But they all end up coming here to this world or this realm. All these traumatized children just come here. And what about that boy? What if he was the runaway kid and he escaped and he made it to the Maw? Or what if that was 6 but made to look like a boy? I don't know, because I faintly recall having some trouble even recognizing that 6 was a girl for a while. I thought she was a boy at first. But then there is the supervisor, somebody else that Lo fears. She could be an authority figure from wherever he was at. But what about the baby? What do you guys think? Maybe he's got a little sister or someone else at the facility that he's afraid of, who just happens to be a baby. Or, I could be completely wrong about these monsters and what they actually signify. Could be something more abstract. Hopefully, the Secrets of the Spire DLC, which sets to release next year, or fall of 2026, will have more answers. Ironically, Little Nightmares feels different, because we have Alone this time. I know that this game is getting a lot of hate. Tarsier Studios left and they didn't work on Little Nightmares 3, but the biggest thing was people were like, Little Nightmares is all about show don't tell. and this game basically told us everything, which I get, but at the same time, they need to give us straight up answers eventually. I don't want to be 40 years old still trying to figure out what the duck is going on in Little Nightmares. So I don't care. I enjoyed this game. I loved how bittersweet it was because there was at least some sweetness in this one. I mean, sure, Mono and Six trudged through their nightmare together, but they had moments where they separated, and I feel like they didn't do every puzzle together, whereas Lo and Lone are literally together through it all. So we are never alone. Fading into consciousness, Not Six wakes up on a hot air balloon that seems to have crashed through the ceiling. Side note, I took my wife, I love my wife, on a wine and hot air balloon thing before. But also, this isn't Six. I want to get that out of the way early. I've learned to actually read the game descriptions because, for example, on Steam, the descriptions for Little Nightmares 1, 2, and 3 give you character names and locations that the game itself will never actually tell you. So this time, I checked the Apple description for Very Little Nightmares, and they don't call her Six this time. They specifically call her the girl in the yellow jacket. It's giving girl with the dragon tattoo energy. But girl in the yellow jacket is way too long to keep saying, so I'll just call her Yellow. But there are gnomes below staring up at her. Dropping down on them and moving out, seeing as birds have made their nests up here, I can assume that we're at the top of whatever building this is, and after platforming ahead, a familiar scene of somebody being dragged off in a cage by someone in a wheelchair plays out. But I wonder who was in that cage. They were reaching their hands out as if to reach for the kid in this cage, whilst grabbing the key from next door. The sound would alert the long-armed guy from Spirited Away. Opening the cage, we see a girl in winter clothes, a hat and a red scarf. She immediately shoves past Yellow, and bolts out. However, not long after, Yellow would find her articles laid out on the floor, and it would appear somebody dragged her down this hole. Is she dead or alive? Moving on, after getting turned to stone by the Eye of Sauron more times than I'm comfortable with, watching long-limbed old guy in the wheelchair— actually, let me just look up his name real quick. Oh, his name is Craftsman. I'm gonna call him Crafty. Look at the way his feet twist backwards, by the way. Disgusting. And why is he watering down kids' clothes? Finding a monster I have not seen in any of the 3 games I've played yet, I can only assume it's from the comics or the podcast. Running from Crafty again, who is trying to wash some clothes, we even see he's got a whole workshop dedicated to hair. But that's when Crafty rolls in and tries to grab us. However, Yellow is able to stay away until he goes away. Anyways, after climbing down past his sketch designs for whatever these are, I don't know what to think. Is he a fashion designer or is he into dolls? If so, I'm pretty sure he can find a job out in the real world. If he's good, I imagine fashion people get paid well. No? I don't know, I've got like 5 pairs of clothes. Very minimalist. Dropping down a vent and seeing a painting of the nest. Here's a better picture on the screen for you guys so you can get a nicer look at that thing. Yeah, so Crafty is pulling boxes out of this room. Important detail, remember this. But also, I want to take a moment to highlight how eyes seem to be a prevalent and recurring thing throughout Little Nightmares. We see them everywhere, and I still haven't figured out what they represent yet. But hopefully I'm gonna find out soon. Dying to boxes and lighting lamps with a matchstick like we're back in Midnight Walk, link to that bittersweet story down below, we fall into a giant room filled with garbage. But as we try to shimmy our way forward, there's something chasing Yellow, so she needs to hurry. We never do find out what monster lies below, but after making our way through and climbing as trash tries to knock us down, we find another room where it looks like clothes are being tailored. However, on the walls are pictures of a girl with silver hair. Now we can't see her face, but I am sure the clothes are for her. But moving forward, we would almost get cornered by one of the monstrous adults here in the nest who is able to use telekinesis to get Yellow. Blowing hot steam on his old skin keeps him back, but taking a closer look at him, he looks like a butler, and his hands seem to be cuffed behind by a golden cuff with an eye engraved on it. Additionally, he is in a perpetual state of being bent. Jumping down a hole, saved by really strong webs, we even see a girl who turns around to notice Yellow as she falls. But how is that girl still alive? She must be quite the survivor. Now, Yellow would have died, or at least reawakened, had it not been for the numerous kid-sized body bags wrapped in spiderwebs. Hopefully we never have to run into whatever made these. Into a child's playroom, must be nice to be spoiled, walking by a bear with its belly cut out and its eyes gouged. Oh, and look at this, it's the butler. There's a mini butler. Actually, let me raise the brightness a bit here. You can't see it too well in the dark. There you go. Look at that. There's also a book of the Maw, so that is foretelling. Moving over into the next room with a bunch of gnomes jumping on the bed, we also see a portrait of a wealthy business monster and a hot air balloon. Having just played Little Nightmares 3, I wonder if he is the Carnival owner. Stepping into the bedroom, I notice that there's multiple toilets and sinks, indicating to me that multiple children must have lived here at once. Plus, there's all the gnomes here. Speaking of gnomes, jumping on the bed broke the bed, but it also opened a path forward for Yellow. Then we see a red candle with wax melting. I'm sure that's not going to burn this wooden mansion down. But we also see a Actually, you know, throughout this game, we see candles all over the place. So I wonder if that means anything. But seeing the red candle here reminds me of Arlecchino from Lies of P. Maybe there's like a secret boss or some kind of monster related to these candles. I don't know. But we also see a drawing on the wall. A larger stick figure in a dress, so probably a woman or whomever was in charge, surrounded by smaller childlike stick figures. But, moving on, we see the butler pull out that girl with the winter clothes from a box. But this box, remember we were talking about the boxes, I told you guys to remember? This box, I'm pretty sure, is one of those boxes that Crafty had closed up and pulled out of that room that we landed in with the photo of the nest. So I think Crafty boxes up those kids and sends them down, to the butler, where he then takes them out, but for what purpose? And I did not see the girl struggling, so is the red scarf girl dead or alive? Yeah, nope, she's dead. So here's my running theory. Crafty catches kids, washes their clothes, then either puts the clothes on dolls, or he's straight up turning these kids into dolls. Or, now that I'm saying this, he's probably doing taxidermy with the children, trying to keep them as lifelike as possible, where the butler then receives those kids and sets them up here for some reason, or for someone. Also, I just realized that girl who was struggling to get out of the cage in the beginning has to be that girl that we saw as we were falling down with the spiderwebs. I'm pretty sure that's her. Somehow, she got out, but her friend with the red scarf here is dead. And you know, after playing the main Little Nightmares games, most kids we come across here are more like this Red Dead friend here. They get caged and they don't fight. The only one who comes to mind who never just accepted their fate was 6, much like that survivor girl we saw earlier. Walking on the table, past these dead bodies and knocking glasses over, a few things do come to mind. I'm starting to wonder if all of these kids come from different timelines, because I see this kid with a newsboy cap on, which was a very early 1900s thing, right? Then you got another kid with a beanie, different ones with different haircuts. I don't know, maybe it's just a stretch, but also kind of interesting to entertain. But also, this is the first time I think I've seen actual food in a Little Nightmares game. All of these plates, steak and veggies. I wonder where they got this food from, if it's even real. Because, actually, no, that's a lie. Because back in Little Nightmares 1, 6 saw a sausage. But even meat on the Maw was questionable. Same for the second and third games. Food and candy looked questionable, especially if we're going with the theory that I had back in Little Nightmares 1, where I was thinking that the guests were being fed human kids. Actually, what if this isn't steak, but the kids' bodies instead? You know what? I'm in too deep, like Sum 41. Yellow, trying to swing on the chandelier, ends up with her face to the floor. Well, table, more times than I can count. I was stressed, but it turned out I'm supposed to be holding down, not just tapping quickly once. And another side note, I wonder why these kids that we play as in these games never die, but the other kids that we come across in the nowhere do die. Into a room with kids watching TV and a hot air balloon painting behind, Yellow unplugs everything and baits the butler in to try to kill him. But his reflexes are too fast, and he throws a pot at her. In the hallway over, there are 2 paintings. Zooming in on the first one, I don't recognize it, but the second one looks like a nest. Dropping under the floor and heading over to the next room, we would finally see her, the girl with the silver hair. She was having a tea party with a bunch of dead kids, but you see, this is when everything would start to make sense. My theory is that this whole mansion was built for her. The butler and craftsman worked to serve her wishes. The chalk drawing with the red candle must have been her, surrounded by her little friends. But in that, she was grown, and yet here, she's small. It makes me wonder if she somehow is an adult in a child's body. But everything she's been doing, or having the other two set up for her, is to feed into her desire to seemingly have company. Friends with kids. The dress up, the tea party, the dinner, the playroom, it's all for her. And knowing what we know about Six and Mono, where they ended up becoming monsters, where Six gets the lady's powers and Mono gets stuck in his loop, becoming the tall man, which, big side note, all Six had to do was save Bro. If she had saved him, he probably wouldn't have perpetuated the cycle. Justice for Mono. But what if this silver-haired girl was a kid, or an adult, who lived here with a bunch of these kids but somehow got twisted into a monstrosity, and now, just like everywhere else in the Nightmare Realm, she's become one of the monsters who hold dominion over their section. And all she wants are her friends back. But continuing, we would see hundreds of pictures of kids. Yellow would even enter a secret room with gnomes looking at photos of their former selves. And in the next room over, we would see more photos. A shipwreck with a lighthouse. This next one, I guess, is floating tree roots. I'm not sure. Oh, the silver-haired girl just barged in, dragging Red Scarf Girl. And she's yelling, visibly upset with her. But why? Is it because she wasn't sitting in her chair where she was supposed to be?
No! No! What the hell are you doing out here, Fred? How did you get out here?
So while I was looking for a picture of the silver-haired girl for this little meme, I learned her name was the Pretender, which kind of tracks with my current theory of who she is. She's pretending to be a kid. We would continue to see a photo of a chair and a hangman, a reference to Little Nightmares 1, but then also see a picture of the Pretender, and I guess she's with her parents, but based on the way it's set up, it looks like they weren't close. While looking at a picture of a baby cradle, Pretender would drag Red Scarf Girl off, and heading downstairs, taking note of the picture with the Pretender oppressing the shadow kids around her, as well as a reference to Little Nightmares 2 in this TV, we check out the statue the Pretender made for herself, with the kids glorifying her. However, when we attempt to leave, the butler pops out and drops a chandelier on Yellow's noggin. However, next time, Yellow is able to dodge, dip, dive, duck, and dodge her way out of the mansion. Through the garden, and oh shit, she's still alive. The girl is still alive. Working together, Yellow and the girl are able to create distance between them and the butler, who is still floating quickly after them. Until the girl decides that it's every girl for themselves. Oh, would you look at that? Sucks to suck. Should have stuck together. But Yellow didn't know she was still alive. Thinking it was the butler banging on the door, she blocks it, and the banging would eventually stop. So either the selfish girl is dead, or she found another way around. You know, she probably learned that from her friend, the Red Scarf Girl, because when Yellow freed her from the cage, she shoved us out of the way to try to save herself, only to need our help again to open the door, only for her to get murked shortly after. This girl probably learned that behavior from that girl. You know what they say, you are the company you keep. Crossing over more dead bodies, Yellow would hear crying in the distance. Walking over, it's the Pretender. But what is she crying about? Taking a look at the floor before her, it looks like she dismembered the Red Scarf Girl. Maybe Pretender is crying over lost friends, but her sorrow turns to rage rather quickly as she notices Yellow is behind her, screeching and starting to chase. And man, this is something out of a nightmare. Imagine you're trying to climb down a cliff and just think about it. You look up and you see somebody defying gravity like Spider-Man and crawling towards you, going downwards. That is quite the sight. Aggressively tapping downwards, soon we would see that girl again. So she did find another way around, but she's not safe yet, because the ground beneath her would collapse. However, of course, she's saved by plot armor, able to grab onto a root and is currently holding on for dear life. Luckily for her, Yellow didn't leave her. Could've, but instead, she risked getting caught to knock down this dead tree to save her, which of course works in Yellow's favor, as when she comes to a dead end, the girl would end up saving her by using leverage to drop a conveniently placed boulder on top of the pretender's head. But and here, I noticed that Yellow had long hair and a red scrunchy thingy, making more sense as to why the description of this game calls her the girl in the yellow coat and not 6. Because that wasn't 6. This was 6. Yellow was dead, but 6 would climb down to see if she was still alive, only to find her yellow raincoat floating in the ocean, and a wooden platform. I presume that she left the nest on that wooden platform, letting the waves carry her to land, or maybe somewhere else where she would be captured by the hunter, saved by Mono, to find the yellow coat again. So we start off in the first comic with 6, back on the Maw, avoiding getting cleaved in half by one of the chefs, and immediately you might start to wonder, when exactly does this comic take place? Which we will get to soon. But what ends up happening is 6 evades the chef through a vent, but she discovers 5 other kids hiding. They're huddled around a campfire and they've taken refuge here. However, they all turn to notice 6 coming in, but one of them exclaims, "You." That's recognition. But how? Has 6 already met these kids before? If you've only played the games so far, we actually don't know who these kids are, and as far as I can tell, they don't appear in the main story. That alone suggests something happens to them during the events of the comics. Their absence raises some questions like, what happened to them, who exactly are they, and how do their stories connect to 6's? But moving on ahead, as one of the kids is telling her, "Hey, you don't belong here," there are those dark worms encroaching upon her, and one of them just barely catches her. However, one of the kids is able to pull her away, and he walks her over to the group. Now, because it's too dangerous for 6 to leave this safe haven, what happens next is the group wants to know how she got here. How did you get to the Maw and what have you seen? What's going on out there? Now from the looks of it, these guys have been up here, stowed away for quite some time. None of the monsters have found them, so it makes sense that they wouldn't know anything outside of those cold metal walls. Well, the question sends 6 back into her memories where she's standing in a city, surrounded by these monstrous adults all seemingly going about their business, not even noticing that they might be stepping on her. However, before we continue, there are 3 things that I want to address here. The first is this the Pale City from Little Nightmares 2? We see the familiar blue tinge, the rain, but we don't see the TV people, which begs me to wonder, are these the same guests from the Maw? It seems odd that during the second game, we don't even see one of these creatures here in the city. But the third thing is 6 herself. She's wearing her yellow raincoat in this flashback. So when exactly does this comic take place? For those who don't know, the chronological order of the series, as far as I know, again correct me if I'm wrong, goes Very Little Nightmares, Little Nightmares 2, then Little Nightmares 1. And where Little Nightmares 3 and the Sounds of Nightmares podcast fit in is still unclear to me at this time of recording. But based on what we can piece together, I believe that this comic takes place after the events of Little Nightmares 2, but before the events of Little Nightmares 1. The biggest indicator here is that 6 is already wearing her yellow coat. For anybody who might have missed that detail, in Very Little Nightmares it was originally another girl who wore that coat. She helped 6 escape the nest but died at the end, leaving the coat floating in the ocean. 6 would leave on a makeshift raft, and later, after being captured by the hunter and rescued by Mono, she reaches the Pale City, where she found the coat again and claimed it for herself. So, why does this take place after Little Nightmares 2? Well, my theory is, after 6 pulls a Mufasa on Mono and escapes the prison realm, she's left to wander the Pale City alone. But by that point, Mono had already dealt with the tall man, and their actions probably slowed or temporarily stopped the signal tower's disrupting broadcast. Admittedly, this part gets a little murky because of the time loop, but it also kind of makes sense that there's a small gap between the cycles before it restarts, where Mono has to spend however many decades in that realm to grow into the tall man again before perpetuating the cycle further. But you're probably asking, BHG, why before Little Nightmares 1? And I think it's quite elementary, my dear Watson. Using the powers of deduction, one can ascertain that in both the prequel, the second game, and the comic, 6 doesn't have any powers yet. However, by the time we reach the end of the first game, she does. That detail, in conjunction with the timeline of the raincoat, makes this the most logical point where the comic fits into the series. But we don't really see everything in totality until we push on in the story, as 6 is trying to find safety in the shadows. But this is where the biggest shadow ends up finding her. This monster with a sack for a face towers over her and jams his finger in her face, causing the other monsters to converge all their attention all at once on poor little 6, who can do nothing but try to cover her ears. The comic immediately picks up with 6 back on the mall, listening to some boy behind bars urging her to tell him what she remembers. But what ends up happening is we cut forward to a scene where 6 is going around the mall and ends up finding a music box which she immediately takes a liking to. Seeing as 6 is really into music, she wants to take it for herself, but there's just one issue. The music box was in the blind janitor's room, so he hears it and immediately goes to grab 6, but he loses her just as fast as he found her. You see, 6 was smart. She snuck around and went behind him to turn on the TV to distract him. That's when the panel just blips off and we return to the group asking 6 again what she remembers. Now for some reason, there's such a heavy emphasis being placed on getting 6 to remember things that she simply can't. But unfortunately, during their conversation, one of the dark worms finds them and slurps one of the kids up, just bam and swallow, gone. Nobody had time to react, to even try and help. They could only disperse. However, they would come back around the fire, and one of the kids would look to 6, who was holding herself, and tell her that sometimes the light is a bad thing. Because once you illuminate the darkness, you see what's been watching you from the void. And when 6 holds up the light, she sees the guests have found her. This is where a lot of the confusion starts to settle in, because as 6 is desperately running from the guests, she ends up in dark waters, helplessly sinking. Deeper and deeper doth she descend into the depths below as her memories sink along with her. And where do they sink to? Into the mask of the lady, who wants to know, what is she hiding? But as we get a closer look at what the lady sees as she consumes 6's memories is that the overwhelming monster from the city with the bag for the face, who was pointing at 6, tied her up and brought her to the Maw, which now answers how 6 even ended up at the Maw after Little Nightmares 2. However, before continuing, I think it's worth highlighting something here. We don't actually know who the narrator is. I'm guessing back there that the lady was the one narrating, asking, what is she hiding, but I don't really know. In the beginning, we think the narrator is just somebody telling the events of everything. But by now, the voice has been speaking to us about 6 as if they were a separate entity. I think the one narrating is the lady who is obsessed with knowing whatever it is that 6 knows, but it's just a theory. Part of me thinks that she is somehow feeding on 6's memories, but I can't find out exactly what it is that she's looking for. But this could also explain why 6 doesn't remember anything, because the lady has been eating her memories. And if we believe that the narrator is the lady, I think it's also revealing what she says here in the very last frame as we're coming up to the Maw. For those of you who have already watched my story explained for the Secrets of the Maw DLC, while the boy was in her residence, I noted that it looked like she had portraits of younger versions of herself on her walls. And I also pointed out how the lady was always touching her face like she was mourning the loss of who she used to be and what she used to look like. And right now, she just said that the shadow is always near, waiting for its chance to take us here. She used the word us. So I believe that the lady used to be a kid, who was somebody also taken by the Maw, taken to the Maw by this monster, where after a time she would then become a monster herself. But who is this monster? He seems different from the other monsters in the Nowhere in that he doesn't exactly want to kill kids, instead he's just capturing them and bringing them here. But picking up back where we left off, the group having settled down after the attack, which by the way, this is another reason why it's confusing, because 6 was just on the run. But after that debacle, the kids insist again on trying to get 6 to remember what she's seen. In fact, thinking that it's going to jog her memory, one of them decides to share his background story. He starts out by saying that the charm he has was something the children in his village were given to protect them from what is called the North Wind. Except the charm didn't work. Their village was completely decimated. All but he and his sister were killed. Of course, the two of them would have to leave, but they could not find a new home anywhere, and this was likely in part due to the fact that no matter where they went, the North Wind would follow them. And this would go on for quite some time, until the boy decided he would stop running. So, they would find refuge in a barn, but they don't get to stay for too long because almost immediately after arriving there, the North Wind catches up to them. It's huffing and puffing like it's gonna blow the barn house down, asking the boy in specific why he won't come out and play. But the boy, sick and tired of being tired and sick, shakes his fist at the sky angrily, and without an ounce of fear, he screams at the wind, telling it to bugger off. However, from the darkness, a pair of red eyes glow, a crooked voice taunting.
Leave you be? Where's the fun in that?
An eye opens, the voice continuing about how it would lose a bet. But then a demonic crow would come into view, stating how the entity it made a bet with cheated. As a murder of crows come crashing down on the barn, rupturing what little protection the kids had left, the boy would whimper in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he would ask. As the sky tore red, the wind would pity him. In an instant, the crows would turn into skeletons, and in the red dust, the only thing that the siblings could see was the shadow of a monster, mocking him for the futility of his efforts. But the boy, his bravery and resolve breaking like the barn protecting them, picks up a crow skeleton and tosses it at the monster, stating that he won't just give up because he has his sister to protect. Except that's when the wind remarks that it's got something to show him, just so long as he stepped outside. Curious as to what it was, he hesitates forward, asking if this was a trick, and his little sister was begging him not to go outside, yet the boy could not resist, and when he steps out, he crumbles to the ground, heat in his nose, pins in his eyes. He manages to rip out one question from his throat. When? Because when he looks up, he sees the corpse of his sister floating in the air.
Your sister has been mine for a long time now.
The boy, recalling this painful memory, would even remark that the question of when was the least important, as there were so many others. Like, who was this monster standing behind him? This giant who appeared out of nowhere, bulging from the doorframe, looming over him like a drenched shadow, its face like a soaked, sagging cloth that revealed nothing. And it said nothing. Its long coat clung to its body like a second skin, and its hands hung heavy at its sides, radiating a quiet, crushing menace. But its hands did not crush. Instead, it held its hand up to the boy, an offering. But the North Wind saw this and immediately panicked, saying,
No! I was so close! This isn't fair!
It shot its rust-colored wind forward, trying to grab him. But the boy, already knowing the horror of one evil, decided to take his chances with the unknown one, clasping his massive hand. In the blink of an eye, the two were gone, with the wind left behind only to slice the barn in half. The thing in the raincoat won the wager. But the specifics of the bet could be anything, from if the boy would fall to fear and give up, or if the boy would choose to go with the raincoat monster or not. But that is how the boy ended up here with the rest of the kids, safe from harm, so to speak. And you know what? I need to find out what that creature's name is. I keep calling and describing the fuck out of him in every way that I can, but I should just look up his name. Okay, I tried looking him up as the Raincoat Monster, but I ended up getting 6 instead. However, I did scroll around and eventually found out who he was. His name is the Ferryman, or the Candleman. But I didn't read anything else, so I don't spoil anything for myself. Actually, the name itself is pretty revealing and connects to a few things. For an example, Candleman. Throughout the main games, every so often we actually see candles, so I feel like that's a nod to this monster. And the Ferryman reminds me of Charon from from Greek mythos, who would ferry souls across the river Styx. In a way, it makes sense that the Ferryman would be here, transporting souls in a boat. But why kids, and why to the Maw? Well, we have to discover more of this nightmare. So the events that follow pick up immediately after Six acquired the music box from the janitor. She managed to bring it all the way back here to the group, and if you're a bit confused about why they do this disjointed, back and forth storytelling, don't worry, I'm in the same boat with you, but it's also what makes Little Nightmares, well, Little Nightmares. The entire series' success is that fuck. The whole thing is predicated on breadcrumbs being spread out and all over for us to keep wanting more. But what ends up happening is Six shows her new friends what she found. She opens the music box and inside is this little mirror where you can see nearly everybody is smiling, even Six, who never smiles. However, here you can kind of see the right edge of her lips raising in amusement. But remember, I said almost everyone, because the big kid in the back isn't smiling. We see his one blue eye and his downturned smile, but that's when his seemingly old hands claw onto the music box and he heaves it over his head to throw it against the wall, smashing it to bits as a bewildered Six races her hands to the side and goes, "WTF, bro?" And I'm not gonna lie, I'd be mad too. Even one of the other kids asks him why he did that. But all he can do is remember his trauma as he looks down at his hands before he stabs his finger out at the music box and says, "You know nothing, Jon Snow." And as the dark worms swirl around them, edging around the fire, afraid to touch the light, Big Boy haunts, saying that they will, as he proceeds to recall the events that led up to his arrival at the Maw. And first off, he hits them with a banger of a quote which adds weight to the tale he's about to tell. He says, "Courage is always so exciting when you don't believe it will be needed." And I really like that quote. But you see, the reason he leads with this is because one night, he and his crew were having some fun investigating a rumored monster house. Now, while the boy had his fearful reservations in that he actually believed the monsters were real, his buddies would mock him for being scared, with one of the kids boasting about how he doesn't believe in kids' stories. Well, that would be his biggest mistake because he's in one of those kids' stories. With the foolishly brave breaking in, what they would find left them in awe. But suddenly, the candles above them would flame on by themselves. As a result, the boy, half petrified, would make one last suggestion to leave, but they insisted on pushing in anyways, pushing past the point of no return. Discovering these grand mirrors, the kids would look at their reflections and begin hysterically laughing. The boy, with a slightly higher level of survivability, choosing not to look, asks them what they see. But when we see what they see, what's presented to us are these nearly monstrous forms of these children, but they also reflect what the kid's innate wishes are. One wants to be tall, so his reflection is a tall man. And yet, the boy, once again ambivalent, says they probably shouldn't be doing that. So of course, one of the kids mocks him, reminding him that last week he was afraid of the wind, which I think is actually funny, considering the North Wind story we just went over. I feel his fear was warranted then, like it is now. So of course, the kids continue looking in the mirror, but all the boy can do is cover his ears as whatever is happening seems to be affecting him in a rather painful way. One kid saw a version of himself built like a pre-patched Arnold Schwarzenegger, broad and strong. Another stared into the glass and saw a perfect duplicate staring back at him. The mirror takes your desires and shows a reflection of you as you wish to see yourself. So for an example, me, I would want to see myself next to my wife because I love my wife, but for these kids, things start to devolve into chaos, with the boy lowering his hands from his eyes to look at his reflection, believing that he should at least try to fit in. However, when he does, his eyes start to glow blue, and when he looks closer, he starts to see something in the mirror. It's got a bow tie, but it has no neck or head. Instead, what we see is what appears to be some orange cloth, maybe. Now, what I want you to remember is that the mirrors show a reflection of the person as they innately want to see themselves, so keep that in mind as we go forward. We also know that in the events leading up to this, the boy has basically kept telling his friend group that, hey, we shouldn't be doing this or going in here because it doesn't make any sense to. We should be fearful of what could happen, only to have his friends belittle him. So as he's looking in the mirror, his eyes glowing cosmic blue with this thing starting to manifest in the mirror, he says to himself, fear makes more sense. But this is when he would snap to his senses and run from the mirror because of what he saw. And his friends would laugh as she trips on the floor, saying that oh, it's a girl. I mean,
Of course you're a girl.
My bad, I didn't know. I thought it was a boy this whole time. But when she looks up, she sees her friends are no longer their normal selves. Instead, they become enamored reflections in the flesh. And they are loving it. They are loving their new forms, but here's one thing. While everybody has their new forms out of the mirror world, the girl doesn't. And that is when, from the mirror, this tentacle shoots out and grabs one of them and pulls them into the mirror world. At the sight of this, everybody begins bolting for the exit. However, it is too late because the tentacles start thrashing out of the mirror dimension trying to grab them all. While they do make it to the hole they used to crawl into the house, they're no longer small enough to fit, except the girl. And so the girl once again narrates in her head, postulating the question of which makes more sense. Is it better to have courage or is it better to have fear? And I think essentially what she's asking is which of these two qualities is going to help you survive. Personally, I think it's a bit of both, but what do you guys think? Moving forward, the group realizes that they need to get back to the mirrors to revert to their normal selves. Except when they get there, the mirror monster immediately grabs the duplicate kid. Like, he grabs his whole body, and he's attached to his other copy, by the way, through his arms. And when the monster viciously picks him up and pulls him into the mirror realm, the kid's arm just rips off. It just tears off, causing them to have to hobble away. And when the girl asks him if he's okay, he's completely incoherent, unable to string even a simple word. And so the tall kid would explain that since his other half was taken, that leaves him as just half a mind, half of a being. However, their next plan would be to try to kill the mirror monster. And knowing that it can teleport through mirrors, the girl runs to try to bait it, with the tall boy ready to smash the mirror once it appears inside of it, hoping that it will effectively kill the monster. So they execute the plan perfectly, things quiet down for a moment, but when the girl goes to check the broken glass on the floor against her friends telling her not to look, she changes. She's like, what's wrong? But her tall friend immediately grabs a cloth and covers her, telling her it's going to be okay. Now, admittedly, this next part is a bit hard to interpret, and I don't know if it was an oversight or on purpose, but what we end up seeing is the duplicates are able to reunite and become whole again, with the tall kid getting absorbed into the mirror and being trapped here. But the girl is looking at the tall kid in the mirror on the other side, saying that they're going to help, that they're going to get him help, I mean. The thing is, she looks normal here, not covered by a cloth. But in the next panel, with the candles still lit in the chandelier above, she's walking away from the mirror in the hunchback form we ultimately see her as, with the duplicates running towards the exit. However, when the girl gets to the exit, the ferryman is there, swinging the door open to meet her. And the girl says it again, fear makes more sense, as she takes the ferryman by the hand and walks off into the dark with him. But before we continue, I wanted to share my theory about the mirror monster. I think the girl was the mirror monster. When we first see it, he's got this orange and what appears to be cloth-like thing where his neck and head should be, and soon we find out it's his tentacle. But because it's orange and the girl is wearing an orange hoodie, I think it could be telling that it's her. But the second thing is that it only appears right when the girl opens her eyes to see her reflection. But before that, there was no mirror monster, which leads us into the third thing, where, as I mentioned before, the mirror manifests what you essentially want. So I think the girl, wanting to stop being belittled for being afraid, would become the monster to instill fear amongst her group. However, when they smashed the mirror monster, and she went to go look at her reflection again, she was broken. And so On the outside world, she ended up becoming the small, feeble little nightmare that she is. The other theory that I have, and again, this doesn't all have to happen at the same time, I could be right about one thing or wrong about the other thing, but I think she might be in the nowhere at this point. Because when we see this frame, everything is huge and she's just really small. Where when they first went in to the monster house, things I believe were just normal sized. And by now, especially after playing Little Nightmares 3, we can probably ascertain that mirrors are a way to more directly travel between the realms. Of course, the ferryman takes her to the Maw, still not sure why he takes all of them to the Maw. Is that like in his eyes, if he has eyes, the safest place in the nowhere? Or does he have a deal with the lady to keep bringing her kids? Coming back to the campfire, the girl says that she mostly survived, but that's why she ended up smashing the music box. Now, of course, Six, having had enough of them, gets up to leave. Or, and this is a big or, a theory as to why she leaves right now. I think Six had a sixth sense about the lady. Maybe it's because the lady has been trying to get Six for some time now, and Six, probably having something innate sleeping within her stomach, felt a connection to the lady, but what I'm basically trying to say is that the lady knew where they were hiding, and she was coming for them. Because we know for sure that the lady can sense energies or something like that, even through walls. In The Secrets of the Maw DLC, when the boy was on top of the elevator, she looks up at him, so maybe she finds this group hiding in the vents and then turns them into gnomes. Six sensed she was coming, that her position was compromised, and decided to go rest somewhere else. Maybe on a briefcase. But I have a question for you guys. Do you like comics that have words, or comics like the ones on the mobile that have animations and sounds but no words? Because in the first episode of the comics for Little Nightmares 2, we find ourselves in a dark forest, with crows flying off due to a disturbance. Panning down, we see a kid booking it through the night, and they're hiding from someone. A flashlight piercing through the night veil, and heavy breathing draws closer and closer, forcing the little one to stop running and hide behind a tree. Keeping out of sight, they flick a rock to create a distraction. Immediately, the hunter turns around to blast the rock to bits. Taking this opportunity, the child scurries down a hole, crawling until eventually they come out. But that's when they noticed something. Slowly peeking from around the corner, they looked up, but they weren't looking at the blue moon that haunts you. They were looking at a boy with a paper bag over his head. Their eyes met for a moment. They were almost in awe of each other, until that breathing returned. From behind, the hunter appeared, light and gun in Six's face, captured. And this is really cool because it shows us the events leading up to Little Nightmares 2. After escaping the nest on the raft, Six landed here and was on the run from the hunter, who eventually does capture her and brings her to his house, where she would be stuck until Mono finds her later. Now, what was the hunter going to do with her? I don't know. Perhaps bring her to the Maw, since that seems to be everybody's move. But I also wonder if Six was actually trapped, because when Mono finds her, she's just chilling in her room listening to music. So maybe she was going to enjoy the music and not bother trying to leave. We also see her do the same thing when she turns into Monster 6, where she didn't try to leave the dimension. Well, at least it didn't seem like she tried to leave. My own personal headcanon, if Six wants to get out of something, she will. Unless there's music. In that case, she's just going to stay put. But the next question is, if Mono saw her, then why didn't he help her? Or did he know he couldn't help her right away, so he just opted to wait a little bit and then break her out? But then at the start of Little Nightmares 2, he pops out of the TV, so there's a bit of empty space waiting to be filled there. But moving on to the next episode, in this spooky, green-tinged forest is a boy. With a bandage over his eyes, maybe he's like Daredevil and can see with sound, and a bindle, he comes upon an area in the land with heavy scars on the ground. Something big left scratch marks here. He decides to climb down into a hole, and this is confusing, because either he finds a creature's head down here, still bloodied, and puts it into his bindle, or he's been carrying it this whole time and just took it out right now to put it down. Either way, doesn't make sense. But he decides to climb back up and out of the tunnel, when out of nowhere, these big claws jut out of the walls and floors, and before he knows it, he's surrounded by them, and they are all grabbing onto him, pulling him back and down deeper and deeper into the dirt. The helpless boy can all but try to reach out and grasp at air until darkness and still wakes the deep. No idea if I used that reference properly, but I said it, I'm gonna stick with it. However, gasping for air, the boy jolts awake from his nightmare. He had fallen asleep down in the tunnels, but in a frenzy, he quickly grabbed his bindle and rapidly bolted out of there, scared that his nightmare could become his reality at any second. But as he was catching his breath, he would hear a creature yelping and another one growling. Turning towards the ominous sounds, he walks forward and finds puddles of blood nearby. But when he goes to investigate, a random TV in the woods would turn on. The static buzz grabbed his attention, and that's when a tall figure would start walking from the inside of the TV and towards the screen, pressing its hands against it, slowly coming out. Both scared and intrigued, the boy just watched as the entity would stand tall above him. For a moment, the boy looked like he was about to smile as he began to lift his bandage from his eyes, but the very second he let out a gasp, the TV clipped and the boy disappeared, with only his screams fading into the television. Elsewhere, a girl would be scraping at the floor with her fingernails, trapped in this room, blood dripping from her nose. A light slams on from outside the door where she turns and sees somebody standing there. Sliding a spoon under the door, the girl grabs it and begins to Shawshank Redemption the floor. The girl would dig and dig into the ground until her spoon broke, but for some reason, she would immediately be given another one to work with, and this goes on for God knows how long, but with every spoon that she got, she would keep tallies of how many on the walls. Snaking further into the earth after magnitudes of effort, blood still dripping, she finally digs her way up and breaks out through the floor. A blue and heavenly light pours in, and she rushes to climb up, but it turns out she just dug herself back into her cell. All that desperate effort to go full circle. As she stands amongst her spoons and dirt, staring at the tally marks on her wall, hope is lost. Until something happens. The door just opens. So of course, she steps out and begins walking through the halls, except something was on the ceiling, watching her, something big, crawling towards her. The doctor. And I wonder if this girl was the body who was kept alive by the time that Mono and Six get to the hospital in Little Nightmares 2. However, outside, cutting to the next kid, a boy clings to the edge of a cliff, his small fingers pressing desperately into the ground. A figure steps forward, cold, and deliberately drives its shoe into the boy's hand. His grip breaks, and as his body plummets to the floor below, his tricycle is hurled after him like a final, cruel punctuation until it crashes. But the boy, crying and hurt, gets up to run. Hiding from the other kids, with his back against the wall, clenching onto his lollipop, he swiftly rushes away, with the porcelain students nearly seeing him. In the school, he crawls under desks, patiently waits for a sneak attack, and when another kid comes in, tears in his eyes, he goes in for a lollipop smash. The boy would go around the school, killing and crying. It's a weird combination. But that's when he finds someone he couldn't kill. With no choice but to run, he hides in a locker. But it's no use. He's been found. An imposing figure would tower above him. A low, wet croak echoes throughout the metal vents, and then he sees her. The teacher's neck stretched unnaturally as her upside-down grin peers in, freezing him in place as she pulls the door open, and he's powerless to move. Moving on, looking through a mask, a child would see TV people glued to the static white of a screen. With the crackling and warbling sounds, the child hops down and approaches a cage, but what he finds isn't for the faint of heart. It seems a rat was trapped inside of it, and even though its tiny hands still gripped the iron bars, it was headless, and where its head was, the gate had either been chewed through or somehow bent open, with tiny pools of blood leading somewhere. Following the trail into a dresser, the kid would find another rat. It was lying down unmoving, and when the kid picked it up, it had blood all over its face and body, so maybe this rat ate the other one's head. Taking the rat and heading to the window, the kid was planning on leaving. However, that's when the sounds from the TV stopped. Turning to see what happened, the child would see the TV people, their faceless faces glaring and hands reaching, and so this little ghost would stand there, with the rat unable to leave. Taking us to the next episode with Mono on his back, looking up at the building about to crash down around him. You know, to be real with you, I can only guess that these comics take place before I know that they take place before the events of Little Nightmares 2, but it's hard to guarantee anything because of how that game starts, with Mono's awakening from the TV in the forest. But the specifics, the who's, what's, where's, when's, and why's, and everything in between are up in the echoes of Limbo. But what we do know is that there's been a fire, and there are many other kids attempting to get out. They bang on the door, but it's locked and chained. And just when they think they're done for, the sprinklers turn on. Somebody extinguished the raging fires. But they didn't do it to save the kids. They did it so that they could have the kids for themselves. The first kid didn't even notice the large hand creeping down from above him until he was already yelling. One by one, it happened so fast, and Mono couldn't even see where it was coming from. I mean, maybe if he'd taken the paper bag off, which was still intact after being through fire and water, he could see better. But while the other kids were making themselves easy targets, Mono would slip out through another way and find a room with an open window and a TV. But he was too small to simply jump out, and there wasn't enough time to move anything around, so Mono could only climb into the broken TV to hide. Except, just like every child in the nowhere, there would be nowhere he could hide. Now, there's this story in Little Nightmares universe that isn't told through games. It's told through a podcast called The Sounds of Nightmares. You can find it on Spotify and Ufi. It's where we start to understand how kids disappear from the real world and end up in another. It's where monsters begin to make a little bit more sense. After listening to the podcast and watching Super Horror Bro's breakdown of it, specifically and only his story section, I wanted to give you guys the skinny on the podcast, share some thoughts as well as some theories to questions like why trauma, and that is going to make more sense soon, but also what are the monsters actually. So the story picks up with a young girl named Ruth, and she's given herself the nickname Noon, or No One, because that's the name the other kids would mock her with back in the counties. The counties are the real world, separate from the nightmare world. Think of the nowhere as like the upside down from Stranger Things, and the counties as, well, the real world. They exist in parallel to each other, separate dimensions. But what we end up learning is that no one, or Noon, gets devastatingly sick after being infected by a waterborne parasite. However, she survives due to this miracle cure she receives, and yet despite this, Noon would continue to live with constant pain. What you need to understand is, although her visible symptoms were eradicated, Ruth herself knew deep down inside that the parasite, or something else, was still there. Which begs the question, what exactly was this parasite, and does it connect to the nowhere? But what ends up happening, and actually that's a question I never answer because I never figure out anything with that. So just putting that out there. If you know, let me know. But what we end up finding is that due to the fact that Ruth begins to experience these nightmares that are indistinguishable from reality, in that she just legit feels everything in her dreams as if they were real, her parents admit her to the county's Psychiatric Institute, or CPI, where a counselor named Otto worked there as a child's psychiatrist. Now, at first, when we listen to their interaction, he seems pleasant and like he wants to help no one, until we learn that he actually does help no one but himself. Now, why is this the case? Well, to understand his motivations, we need to look back a bit into his past, where we learn that he lost his younger sister Cece when they were children. It turns out Otto's sister was taken by the ferryman. You see the connection from the comics now? Now, things really start coming into view. You gotta remember, I'm new to this, so this was a revelation to me. But knowing this, by the time that Ruth and Otto meet in their therapy sessions and no one begins talking about the ferryman, I mean, you can guess where this is going, a little fire lights up in his mind. Otto recognizes the name. Digging further into Noon's... Oh, and he recognizes it because that's what Cece would call him, by the way. The ferryman. But digging further into Noon's explanations about her dreams, she tells him how she can smell and see things, how she doesn't feel sick at all when she's there. She is a stronger version of herself when she's in the nowhere. That makes sense too when we look at Mono, Lo, and Six. I mean, they all have their powers one way or another that they wouldn't have in the real world. But moving forward, Noon begins talking about some of the kids that she meets, as well as locations she sees while in the Nightmare Realm. And some of these we end up seeing in the game. We'll talk about that soon. But there are also characters and places that we haven't seen yet. For an example, there's one kid called the Jester who gets used by a monster as a scrub in a bathhouse. That was horrifying. Like, imagine a giant monster picked you up and started using you as like a brush for its body. Starts, soap and everything, or if they even use soap, but like you're trying to breathe and you're getting scrubbed against his skin. That was, oh my god. But the other thing is, and this is wildly important, episode 3, Otto would begin to monitor No One sleeping, where he would see her with his own eyes as she begins to dream, vanish before reappearing. She just bloops and then comes right back. Presumably, she quite literally disappeared from the counties, from the real world, and materialized in the nowhere, in the alternate dimension. In fact, during that session, in that episode, she also mentions a shopping mall, but also feeling half her normal size, which synchronizes with the other games in that when we go into the nowhere, everything appears disproportionately larger. This also explains the post-credit scene of Lo back in the real world at the end of the third game. Lo was, and probably was, the only one who was able to leave the nightmare world. But that also explains why Alone couldn't go with him. She could not exist in the real world. She was imaginary, powered by Lo. And since we're talking about the third game, in episode 4 of the podcast, no one would actually talk about the carnival and a purple man in a suit who would make kids perform. So that's another cool connection that we see here and in the game. But another thing she ends up mentioning, and I think this is important, is how the nowhere is actually structured. So, to my understanding, the way the locations of the nowhere are set up, the spiral, the nest, the mall, the carnival, the school, etc., it's like, instead of being separate locations, like stars that are spread out in the sky, they're more like one space. They operate in one place like a mall with different floors. They're all stacked on top of one another, and the mirrors are actually how the kids are able to teleport from floor to floor, which again makes sense considering Little Nightmares 3. But it also shows a potential, that's a weird word, a potential why some mirrors are destroyed, like the ones at the Carnival, and all the ones that are on the Maw. I think especially for the Maw, since that's where the ferryman kept taking them. The lady wouldn't want them to escape, and I thought she just didn't like reflections, that's why she kept destroying mirrors, but I think that was only part of it. Also, a quick aside, at the end of every session, Otto gives Noon candy, and I thought that was kind of weird. At first I thought he was trying to condition and create a positive association between them, as well as probably get her addicted to the sessions, or whatever it is that they're doing, or maybe, their interactions together, because sugar is a drug. But I feel like there's more to that, and I don't actually find out what that is. But what we end up finding out is that Otto stops seeing No One as only a patient. She becomes his obsessive means of finding his lost sister Cece. The way he devolves from a seemingly compassionate caretaker into a manipulative and conniving monster is staggeringly insane. Wanting to, what he calls, mutually dream, basically Otto wants to go into Ruth's dreams with her to get into the nowhere. In fact, in the second episode, Otto, against No One's apprehension, insists that she was to wear a device on her head, which for me immediately reminded me of Little Nightmares 3. Remember when we fought that doctor and there was the bed with the device and the recorder? I'm pretty sure that institute is this very one. The CPI where Ruth was interrogated by Otto, but in the nowhere. However, by the 6th episode of the podcast, Otto finally fine-tunes the apparatus properly, and right after forcing her to eat more candy, and yes, he insists aggressively, he starts the process of entering the dream dimension. And the way he does this is by hypnotizing No One, getting her to speak and lull herself into a dream state, but while Noon is talking, she mentions that she sees a yellow coat, to which Otto is astounded by, almost seemingly out of recognition, which I thought was interesting. Why would he recognize a yellow coat? And so I start thinking, like, what if Otto's sister, Cece, was 6? Or even Yellow from Very Little Nightmares. Cece makes some sense in that her name almost resembles 6. Cece, and then there's the X. But Yellow herself had the raincoat first, so maybe Yellow was Cece. But moving along, once they're both hooked up and in, they find themselves in the threshold, the space in between dimensions, which no one calls the halfway place. But that is when the ferryman himself shows up, telling no one, "Come with me if you want to live." Turns out he knows that Otto is evil, and the ferryman whisks her away to the nowhere for good, closing the door on him. However, before doing that, the ferryman mentions how a price needs to get paid to enter the nowhere. Trauma, which lines up with everything that we've seen so far. Children with trauma are picked by the ferryman, and he takes them into the nightmare world. But why specifically trauma? What is it about trauma that enables this to happen? Well, my best theory is that, especially with kids that have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, their minds are already shaped by repeated re-experiencing. Their CPTSD isn't just something that happens to them once, it's more complex. The trauma is happening over a prolonged period of time, which again lines up, synchronizes with kids in real life who often can't just leave whatever shelter that they have. But the trauma they suffer is something that their brains keep on replaying like a stuck record. So when we look at the real world insights between CPTSD and how intense nightmares can actually arise from it, the in-game inspirations or applications kind of make more sense. Those repeated nightmares, flashbacks, and intrusive memories create a constant doorway between their waking world and the place where fear lives. Fear and trauma make sense. For most people, a nightmare is something they wake up from, but for these kids, it's a place they never leave. This makes them perfect targets. The trauma acts like a beacon, and the ferryman doesn't have to create any fear because it's already there, looping inside of them. All he has to do is follow it to hone in on them and find them. But then there's also the topic of monsters. And so initially I thought that the monsters were just the way that kids perceived adults, which does definitely make sense, but there's got to be more to it. Looking at all of the stories we've witnessed in Little Nightmares so far, the corrupting signal tower, the feast of greed at the Maw, the mirror, etc., I think the nightmare realm has this innate corrupting power that just mutates people over time. And we've seen this done before with Monster 6, right? And also Mono becoming the Thin Man. Some faster than others, but I feel like some humans cross into the nightmare where they get corrupted. Needless to say, Otto doesn't like what happens next. He wakes up, he doesn't see no one. Frantically thrashing about, he looks for her, but she is gone, meaning he's not going to be able to find CC. At least anytime soon. Because this doesn't stop him. Sometime in the near future, while he was in his office, another kid comes in. This boy, named Ethan, is sleepwalking, and the counselor hands him some candy, ready to continue his dream works, potentially hinting at another season of the podcast, where we will probably find out more about what Otto does exactly and who Ethan is, and hopefully we find out what happened to Cece and Ruth. I mean, they gotta give us answers eventually, right? They can't keep us wondering what's going on with Little Nightmares forever. However, after listening to the podcast and reading the comics, learning about the ferryman, the way I see it currently, this enigmatic figure isn't a bad guy. Just like I thought back in the comics, he's not out to kill kids, he's just trying to save them. I think. And he always seems to take them to the Maw, which is weird because it doesn't seem to be a bastion of safety, but hey, at least we know who he is a little bit more and what his function as this bridge between worlds is.